Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto fell in love with Harribel and became the king of Hueco Mundo. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Stranger in the Sand. The end was not an explosion. It was a tear. One moment, Naruto Uzumaki was a maelstrom of golden light and raw power, forcing a being of impossible might toward a screaming wound in the sky. The next, reality itself shredded like wet paper. The enemy, a creature born of divine arrogance and cosmic nihilism, was pulled into the void, its final silent shriek swallowed by the absolute nothingness between worlds. But it did not go alone. Its hand, a claw of crystallized energy, had lashed out, not in attack, but in a final, desperate act of spite. It had snagged the fabric of Naruto's chakra cloak, and the hero of the shinobi world was dragged along for the ride. There was a sensation of being turned inside out. Light, sound, and sensation were stripped away, replaced by a pressure that threatened to unmake him atom by atom. His consciousness flickered. He felt the Sage of Six Paths, power roar within him. A defiant sun against an infinite night, desperately holding his very concept of self together. He felt Kurama, a furious, burning anchor in his soul, bellowing a challenge into the abyss. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. He fell. The impact was brutal. He hit the ground with a force that would have turned a normal man into a red paste, cratering the ground beneath him. For a long, silent moment, he didn't move. Every muscle fiber screamed. His chakra, once an endless ocean, was a churning, depleted puddle. The golden cloak of his Kurama chakra mode had vanished, leaving him and the tattered remains of his black and orange jacket. A groan escaped his lips, the sound swallowed by a profound, oppressive silence. He pushed himself up, one arm trembling. The world swam into focus. White. Everything was white. A desert of fine, pale sand stretched to a horizon that never seemed to end. Above, the sky was not blue, but a deep, eternal night, starless and vast. A sliver of a broken moon hung in the blackness like a skeletal grin. There were no clouds, no wind, no sign of life. The air itself felt wrong, thin, heavy, and saturated with a spiritual residue that was both cloying and achingly empty. It felt like standing in a graveyard the size of a planet. Konoha, he whispered, the name a prayer on his lips. He tried to reach out, to sense the familiar energies of his home, of his friends. Nothing. The connection was gone. Not distant, not faint. It was severed, as if a line had been cut with a divine blade. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone. He staggered to his feet, swaying. A sharp pain lanced through his side. Looking down, he saw a deep gash tearing through his clothes and into the flesh beneath, a parting gift from his final enemy. It was bleeding sluggishly, but the wound was already beginning to stitch itself closed, tendrils of red chakra knitting the tissues together with practiced efficiency. The benefit of being an Uzumaki and a Jinchuriki. Okay, Naruto, think. He muttered to himself, his voice raspy. He was a veteran now, a commander. Panic was a luxury. Rule 1. Assess the situation. He was alive, wounded, but alive. His chakra was dangerously low, but recovering. He was he had no idea where he was. It wasn't the elemental nations. It felt like a different dimension entirely, one that was actively hostile to life. This place was saturated with an energy. But it wasn't the natural energy he knew from Mount Myoboku. This was something else, something dead. His sensory abilities, a passive extension of his sage mode, flared to life. It was like dropping a stone into a stagnant pond. The ripples went out, and what came back was hunger. A vast, primal, mindless hunger, directed squarely at him. From beneath the dunes, from the shadows cast by towering, petrified trees that looked like skeletal hands reaching for the broken moon, things began to stir. Of course, he sighed, a note of profound weariness in his voice. Couldn't just be an empty desert. He didn't have to wait long. The first one erupted from the sand 100 meters away. It was a grotesque parody of life, a towering beast of bone and black sinew. Its face a cracked mask with a gaping hole where a heart should be. It was huge, easily the size of one of Gamabunta's smaller children, and it let out a guttural roar that was pure, undiluted avarice. Naruto didn't even flinch. He just watched it charge, its massive feet kicking up plumes of white sand. He was a beacon in this world of shadows, a blazing bonfire of life energy in a land of embers. He was food, the most delicious meal this creature had likely ever sensed. As the hollow, for he could feel its empty, ravenous nature, drew close, he shifted his weight. His movements were fluid, economical. He wasn't the boisterous, theatrical fighter he used to be. The war had burned that out of him, replacing it with a lethal efficiency. The beast swiped with a claw the size of a cart, aiming to cleave him in two. Naruto simply swayed to the side, the talons missing him by a centimeter. Without pausing, he drew a kunai from the pouch on his leg. He didn't coat it in wind chakra or throw it. He just moved. A flicker of motion, faster than the hollow's eyes could track, brought him alongside its massive leg. He drove the simple steel blade into a joint in its bone armor, not with brute force, but with a precise, chakra-infused strike that shattered the connection. The creature bellowed in pain and surprise, its leg buckling. It began to fall, a collapsing mountain of bone. Naruto was already moving, running up its collapsing form as if it were a ramp. He reached the back of its neck just as two more hollows, smaller and leaner but no less monstrous, burst from the sand to join the fray. He ignored them. He placed his right hand on the first monster's mask. Rasengan. He didn't need a clone to form it anymore. The swirling sphere of pure chakra materialized in his palm in an instant, its familiar high-pitched hum the only sound besides the hollows, snarls. He pushed. There was no grand explosion. The Rasengan simply ground into the mask, a drill of perfect rotation and power. It cored through the bone, the energy obliterating the creature's spiritual essence from the inside out. The massive body dissolved into dissipating black and red particles before it even finished hitting the ground. Naruto landed softly on the sand, turning to face the other two. They skidded to a halt, a flicker of something akin to caution in their mindless hunger. They had seen. Their colossal comrade simply ceased to exist. He gave them no time to reconsider. One of them opened its maw, a crackle of red energy gathering within it. A Sero. He'd seen them before, in the war's chaotic aftermath. Before the energy could fully form, a black rod shot out from Naruto's sleeve, an application of his six paths power he rarely used. It wasn't an attack, it was a pin. The rod slammed into the ground at the hollow's feet. And the creature froze, its spiritual energy suddenly and completely suppressed. The third hollow lunged. Naruto met it head-on. He didn't bother with a jutsu. He just balled his fist. A flash of orange light flickered around his eyes, the barest hint of sage mode, drawing in the faint traces of natural energy that existed even in this desolate wasteland. S punch connected with the hollow's mask. The resulting shockwave was silent but devastating. The sand in a 50-meter radius was blasted away, and the hollow's entire upper body simply disintegrated. The remaining beast, still pinned by the black rod, thrashed uselessly. Naruto walked toward it calmly, his expression unreadable. He could have destroyed it. Instead, he placed a hand on its mask, and a gentle, warm light flowed from his palm. The creature's frantic struggles ceased. The mindless rage in its eyes faded, replaced by a deep, vacant confusion. Then, with a soft sigh, its form dissolved, not into nothing, but into purified spirit particles that drifted up toward the broken moon. He stood there for a moment, the silence returning, now deeper than before. He had just confirmed several things. First, these creatures were a threat, but not to him. Not in this state. Second, his power worked here, albeit strangely. Third, and most importantly, his presence was a dinner bell. Staying in one place was not an option. He turned, picked a direction at random, and began to walk, a lone, orange and black figure in an endless sea of white. He had a kingdom to save, a world to return to. This was just a detour. A long, dangerous, and very, very lonely detour. The throne room of Las Noches was a monument to stillness. Vast, stark, and overwhelmingly white, it was a chamber designed to amplify the presence of its ruler. And at this moment, its ruler was displeased. Harribel sat on the bone-white throne, her posture a study in controlled power. Her olive skin, blonde hair, and the high, sharp collar of her jacket were the only spots of color in the cavernous room. Her emerald eyes were fixed on the vast expanse of the desert visible through the open wall of the palace, but she wasn't seeing the view. She was sensing. Minutes ago, a spiritual pressure had bloomed in the distance. It was not the familiar, jagged signature of a hollow, nor the refined, cold pressure of a Shinigami. This was something else entirely. It was chaotic yet centered, immensely powerful yet alive. It felt like a sun had just been born in the middle of their dead world, a searing, vibrant energy that was anathema to everything Hueco Mundo represented. Then, just as quickly, several lesser hollow signatures had converged on it, only to be extinguished. Not devoured, not defeated in a war. Why that left lingering traces of a struggle? They were simply erased. One after another, snuffed out like candles. Apache. Mila rose. Sung Sun. Her voice was calm, a low alto that carried easily through the hall. From the shadows near the throne, her three Fracken materialized. What is it, Lady Harribel? Chirped Apache, the most aggressive of the three, her fists already clenched. Did you find something for us to kill? Mila rose, tall and powerfully built, cracked her knuckles. If it's big, I call dibs. I'm bored. Sung Sun, her arm demurely covering her mouth, let out a faint, mocking sigh. Do try to contain your brutish tendencies. It's so unseemly. Harribel ignored their bickering. It was the constant, familiar noise of her life, the sound of her loyalty and her burden. There is an anomaly in Sector 7. A spiritual signature I do not recognize. Its power is significant, and it just dispatched a pack of Ejuka's class hollows without any discernible effort. That got their attention. Ejukas were not mere fodder. For something to eliminate them so easily was a matter of note. A vasto lord, Mila Rose asked, her earlier boredom replaced by a flicker of genuine interest. No, Harribel said, her gaze unwavering. The signature is wrong. It feels full, hot, like a living thing. The three exchanged glances. A living thing with that much power in Hueco Mundo. The idea was absurd. Only Shinigami trespassed here, and their Ryutsu was cold, orderly. This was different. Perhaps it is one of Aizen's forgotten experiments, Sung Sun suggested, her voice laced with disdain for their former master. Aizen's creations were all catalogued or destroyed, Harribel countered. She rose from the throne, her movements graceful and deliberate. This is new, and anything new in this world is a threat until proven otherwise. We will investigate personally. Apache grinned, a sharp, predatory expression. Finally, some real action. Do not be reckless, Apache, Harribel warned, her tone leaving no room for argument. We know nothing of what we are facing. We will approach with caution. Observe first, engage only if necessary. She stepped to the edge of the open-air throne room and, with a flicker of sonido, vanished. Her three Fracken followed a heartbeat later, 4 streaks of compressed sound cutting through the night toward the source of the disturbance, Tawa. Rode the impossible bonfire burning in their world of ashes. Naruto had been walking for what felt like hours. The scenery never changed. White sand, black sky, broken moon. It was a monotonous, soul-crushing landscape designed to drive a person mad. He was tired. The adrenaline from his arrival had faded, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its place. His chakra was slowly refilling, but the unnatural atmosphere seemed to fight the process. Like trying to breathe through a wet cloth. He stopped, scanning the horizon. Nothing. Just more of the same. He was starting to think this entire dimension was just one big, empty sandbox when his senses flared again. 4 signatures. Fast, coordinated, and powerful. Leagues above the mindless beasts he had dealt with earlier. These were not random hollows. They were organized. They were warriors. And they were heading directly for him. He sighed, running a hand through his spiky blonde hair. Can't a guy get a 5-minute break? He stood his ground, turning to face the direction of their approach. Running was pointless. If they were this fast, they could track him anywhere. Better to face them here, on his terms. He centered himself, letting his chakra circulate, ready for whatever came next. They arrived in a blur of motion, landing 50 meters away in a perfect line, their sudden appearance kicking up a silent storm of sand. His eyes widened slightly. They looked Human. Mostly. The one in the center was clearly the leader. A woman with tanned skin, piercing green eyes, and a cascade of blonde hair. Her hollow mask fragments formed a IGH collar around her neck and covered the lower half of her face, leaving her stern, intelligent eyes visible. A massive, shark-toothed weapon was strapped to her back. She radiated a calm, immense pressure that dwarfed the other three. To her right stood a tall, Amazonian woman with dark hair and a wild look in her eyes. To her left, a shorter, more feral-looking girl with light blue hair practically vibrated with aggressive energy. The last one, a slender woman with green hair, hid her mouth behind her hand, but her eyes were sharp and calculating. They all had holes somewhere on their bodies, and fragments of bone masks clinging to them. So, not human, but not mindless hollows either. Something in between. The silence stretched, thick with tension. They were studying him, and he was studying them. He saw warriors, survivors. He saw caution in the leader's eyes, aggression in the wild ones, and cunning in the last. The feral one, Apache, couldn't stand the quiet. "What is that?" she snarled, pointing a finger at him. "It's not a hollow. It smells wrong. It smells alive," Mila Rose added, her arms crossed. Her gaze was fixed on Naruto's chest, on the steady rise and fall of his breathing. It was a sight so alien in this world it was deeply unsettling. "Patience," Harribel said, her voice muffled slightly by her mask. Her eyes, however, were locked on Naruto's. She saw no mask, no hollow hole. She saw a young man in strange, tattered clothing, whose blue eyes held a weariness that seemed at odds with the sheer, overwhelming life force pouring off him in waves. He wasn't afraid. He was waiting. "What are you?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. It wasn't a philosophical question. It was a demand for classification. Predator, or prey. Naruto met her gaze. He had faced down gods and monsters. A tense standoff in a desert was familiar territory. "Just a traveler who got lost," he said, his voice even. "I don't want any trouble. I'm just looking for a way home." Sung Sun let out a delicate, mocking laugh. "Home, little boy, there is no home from here. This is Hueco Mundo. This is the end of the road." Hueco Mundo. Naruto repeated the name, filing it away. "So that's what this place was called. World of the Hollows." It fit. "He's lying," Apache spat. "No one just gets lost here. He's an intruder, a Shinigami spy." "I'm not a Shinigami," Naruto stated plainly. "I don't even know what that is." It was a partial lie. He knew the term, but in this context, it was the truth. He was not one of them. Harribel took a step forward, the sand crunching under her boot. "Your energy says otherwise. It is controlled, refined, yet it possesses a vitality that is poison to this land. You are an anomaly, and anomalies are threats." "Being alive isn't a threat," Naruto countered, his tone hardening slightly. He was tired of being treated like a freak of nature. "It's just being alive. Maybe your world could use a little more of it." That was the wrong thing to say. Apache exploded. "Poison. He calls us poison," she shrieked, her body blurring as she launched herself at him in a burst of sonido. "I'll tear your living tongue out of your head." Naruto's eyes tracked her movement perfectly. She was fast, incredibly so, but to his senses, honed by countless life or death battles, she was moving in slow motion. He didn't move to counter, not yet. He wanted to see what they were capable of. Apache appeared in front of him, her hand shaped into a claw, aiming for his face. He simply tilted his head. Her claws raked the air where his neck had been. She spun, aiming a savage kick at his ribs. He brought his forearm up, catching the blow with a dull thud. The force was considerable. It would have shattered a normal person's arm. It barely made him shift his stance. Apache's eyes widened in shock. It was like kicking a statue. Before she could recover, Mila Rose was on him from the other side, her fist wreathed in a green light. "Don't have all the fun, Apache." Naruto pivoted on his heel, letting Apache's momentum carry her past him and directly into Mila Rose's path. The two of them collided in a tangle of limbs and surprised yelps. From behind, Sung Sun flicked her sleeves, and 3 green, serpentine energy streams shot toward him, aiming to bind his arms and legs. He simply stomped his foot. A pulse of chakra erupted from the ground. disrupting the energy constructs and causing them to dissipate harmlessly. The entire exchange had taken less than 3 seconds. The three Fracken were left staring, momentarily stunned. He hadn't thrown a single punch. He had just moved. Enough. Harribel's voice cut in, sharp as glass. Apache and Mila Rose disentangled themselves, glaring at Naruto with a newfound, grudging respect. They were predators, and they recognized a superior one when they saw it. Harribel stepped forward, her hand moving to the hilt of the giant blade on her back. You possess skill, that much is clear, but you are avoiding the question. Your existence here is a disruption to the natural order. You will come with us. Willingly, or by force. Naruto let out a breath, a small cloud of condensation in the cold air. Look, I already told you. I don't want a fight. I'm tired, I'm wounded, and frankly, you all seem like you've got enough problems without starting a war with a stranger. The war has already begun, Harribel stated. It began the moment your presence scarred this land. She drew her weapon, the Tiburon. Its sheer size was intimidating, a massive, hollow-spined blade that looked more like a brutal club than a sword. The air grew heavy with her spiritual pressure, a crushing weight that promised drowning depths and crushing force. Naruto's easy-going posture vanished. His blue eyes sharpened, and the ambient energy of the world seemed to shift around him. He wasn't smiling anymore. All right, he said, his voice low and serious. I tried being nice. He brought his hands together in a familiar cross-seal. Shadow clone jutsu. In a series of smokeless puffs, a dozen identical Narutos appeared around him, each one radiating the same potent life force. The four Arankar stiffened. It wasn't just the numbers. Each clone felt real, substantial. It wasn't an illusion. Harribel's eyes narrowed. An interesting trick. It's more than a trick, the original Naruto said, his hands now free. He held up his right palm, and chakra began to swirl violently within it. This is a warning. Stand down. The hum of the Rasengan filled the air. It wasn't the small, controlled version he'd used on the hollow. This one was larger, more violent, a miniature hurricane of pure destructive potential. Harribel did not stand down. She held her blade forward. Your warning is noted, and ignored. The battle was joined. The clones surged forward, engaging the three Fracken. It was a chaotic, beautiful dance of violence. Apache's wild, Sero-infused brawling was met by clones who mirrored her ferocity. Mila Rose's powerful, straightforward strikes were parried and redirected by tactically superior opponents. Sung Sun's anaconda constructs were sliced apart by kunai coated in wind chakra. Despite being outnumbered 3-1, the Fracken were holding their own, their experience and raw power a match for the clones, numbers and tactics. But the real fight was in the center. Harribel blurred forward, her massive blade swinging in a deadly arc. Naruto met her not with his Rasengan, but with his body. He ducked under the swing, the wind from the blade ruffling his hair, and drove a palm heel into her midsection. She grunted, her hierro, the passive steel-like skin of an Arankar, absorbing most of the blow, but the force still sent her skidding back several feet. She was strong, and tough. You are fast, she acknowledged, her breath misting. But you cannot harm me. Red energy began to gather at the tip of her sword. Sero. A concentrated beam of destructive power shot toward him. Naruto didn't dodge. He thrust his Rasengan forward to meet it. The two attacks collided with a deafening roar. The swirling sphere of chakra ground against the focused beam of energy. A war between creation and destruction in miniature. For a moment, they were deadlocked, a brilliant explosion of light pushing the sand out in a perfect circle. Then, Naruto's Rasengan overpowered the Sero, tearing through it and continuing toward Harribel. She was forced to twist away, the dissipating energy of the Rasengan grazing her side and tearing a hole in her jacket, revealing the number 3 tattooed on her breast. She landed lightly, her eyes wide with shock. Nothing overpowered a Sero. Nothing. Naruto stood his ground, his chakra churning. He was winning, but it was costing him. His reserves were still too low. He needed to end this. Had enough. He called out. Harribel didn't answer. She simply raised her sword. Ola Azul. A blade of high-pressure blue energy shot from her sword, firing at him like a projectile. He leapt over it, but she was already firing another, and another. He was forced onto the defensive, weaving and dodging the rapid-fire energy blasts. He was being pinned down. He landed, skidding to a halt, and saw her charging, her blade held high for a decisive strike. He knew a direct block would be foolish. He needed something more. He drew in a sharp breath, pulling on the sparse natural energy of Hueco Mundo. It was like trying to drink from a dry well, but he was a master. He found the trickles, the hidden reserves, and drew them into himself. Oh, range pigmentation flared into existence around his eyes. His pupils shifted from round to the horizontal bars of a toad. Sage mode. The effect was instantaneous and profound. To Harribel, it was as the sun she had sensed earlier had suddenly focused all its intensity into the man standing before her. His presence swelled, becoming immense, ancient, and terrifyingly calm. He was no longer just a source of life energy. He felt like a part of the world itself, a mountain or an ocean given form. She faltered for a barest fraction of a second, her instincts screaming at her. That was all the time he needed. He met her downward slash not with a weapon, but with his bare hand. The sound of his palm meeting her massive blade was a thunderclap. The sword, a weapon capable of leveling a city block, stopped dead. Cracks, like spiderwebs, appeared along its surface. Harribel stared in utter disbelief. "I told you," Naruto said, his voice now layered with the deep resonance of sage mode, "I don't want to fight." With a flick of his wrist, he didn't just parry her blade, he shattered it. The Tiburon, her soul-bound weapon, exploded into 1,000 glittering fragments. The three Fracken, who had just managed to destroy the last of the shadow clones, froze in horror. Their leader, their queen, had been disarmed. By a bare-handed man. Harribel was thrown back by the force of her own failed attack. Landing hard but immediately regaining her feet. She was weaponless, her Ryutsu flaring wildly in shock and fury. But she was not defeated. She was the Tercera Espada. She was a queen. Sacrifice was the core of her being. She brought her hands together, a massive amount of water beginning to coalesce out of the dry air around her, her spiritual pressure skyrocketing. She was preparing one of her strongest techniques. A move that would devastate the landscape for miles. Naruto saw the desperation in her eyes. He saw the willingness to self-destruct if it meant taking him down. And he saw her three followers. Their faces pale with terror, not for their own lives, but for hers. He had seen that look before. In Nagato, in Sasuke, in himself. He couldn't let her do it. His exhaustion, the lingering damage from his dimensional trip, and the strain of using sage mode with so little natural energy to draw upon all crashed down on him at once. He had one good shot left. He moved, his speed in sage mode a thing of beauty. He flowed past her building attack, appearing directly in front of her. He didn't attack, he simply placed 2 fingers on her forehead. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Harribel's eyes went wide. The immense, tsunami-like wave of water she was summoning collapsed into a harmless drizzle. The crushing spiritual pressure she was emitting vanished. Her body went completely limp. And she crumpled forward, unconscious, into his arms. He had used a gentle, precise pulse of sage chakra to disrupt her energy systems and knock her out, a technique Jiraiya had once taught him for non-lethal subdual. He held her for a moment, her surprising weight slumping against him. She was just a person, he realized. A person trying to protect her own, in the only way she knew how. He carefully laid her on the sand, then turned to face her 3 followers. Apache, Mila Rose, and Sung Sun were frozen, a mixture of rage and terror on their faces. Their leader was down. They were next. Lady Harribel, Apache screamed, and the 3 of them charged as one, all caution thrown to the wind. Naruto just sighed. He was so tired. But as they closed in, he wasn't the one who stopped them. A wave of immense spiritual pressure, cold and regal, washed over the battlefield, freezing them in their tracks. Harribel was stirring. She pushed herself up, one hand to her head, her mask now cracked and broken. Revealing her full face for the first time. She was beautiful, and she was furious. But her fury was not directed at him. It was directed at herself. "He is not our enemy," she said, her voice strained. She looked at Naruto, who was swaying on his feet, the orange pigmentation around his eyes fading. The burst of power had taken its toll. He looked utterly drained. He is something else. She saw it clearly now. He had defeated her, utterly and completely. He had shattered her sword, broken through her defenses, and had her at his mercy. And he had chosen to spare her. In this world, where the strong devoured the weak without a second thought, such an act was not just merciful. It was incomprehensible. She made a decision. It was pragmatic. It was necessary. Lagoda, she commanded, her voice regaining its authority. She thrust her hand forward, and a small sphere of high-density water shot from her palm, not at his chest, but at his feet. It wasn't an attack meant to kill. It was a snare. The sphere hit the sand and instantly expanded into a prison of swirling, inescapable water. Naruto, too exhausted to dodge, was caught. The water swirled around him, heavy and dense as concrete, holding him fast. It didn't crush him, but it held him immobile. He looked at her through the watery prison, a flash of surprise in his eyes. He could break it, probably. But he didn't have the strength to fight her and her followers and whatever else this place could throw at him right now. He had lost. Harribel rose to her full height, ignoring the concerned cries of her Fracken. She walked to the edge of his prison, her emerald eyes meeting his blue ones. "You are too dangerous to be left free," she said, her voice a low murmur. "And you are too valuable an anomaly to be killed. You will be a guest of Las Noches until I can determine what you are." Naruto just stared at her, the fight finally leaving him. He gave a single, weary nod. "Bring him," she commanded her Fracken. "And show him a guest's courtesy. He has earned that much." Without another word, she turned and began the long walk back toward the distant fortress, 1,000 questions racing through her mind. She had just captured a living sun, and she had no idea if it would illuminate her world, or burn it to the ground. Miles away, in a forgotten stretch of the Manos forest, a patrol of 5 Ijuka's class Arankar were on a routine sweep. They were laughing, joking about the weakness of a rival faction, their arrogance a palpable thing. "Did you see the look on his face when I took his arm?" One of them, a wolf-like creature, cackled. "He was always weak." Another, a serpentine Arankar, hissed. "Power is for those who take it." Their laughter died abruptly. A feeling of wrongness had descended upon the area. It wasn't the presence of an enemy. It was the absence of everything. The air grew still. The faint hum of reishi in the atmosphere faded to nothing. "What is this?" the wolf Arankar whispered, looking around. The petrified trees around them seemed to shimmer, their edges blurring. One of the Arankar at the edge of the group suddenly gasped. He looked down at his hand. It was fading, becoming translucent. What's happening to me?" There was no pain, no sound. He just began to dissolve, not into spirit particles, but into utter non-existence. His comrades watched in mute horror as he was erased from reality, his final, terrified expression vanishing into thin air. Panic erupted. They tried to run, to use Sonido. But the effect was spreading. A creeping patch of absolute nullity that unmade everything it touched. The serpentine Arankar was next, its long body dissolving from the tail up. Then another. The wolf Arankar, the leader, let out a final, terrified howl as the wave of nothingness washed over him. He felt his memories, his power, his very soul being unwritten. His existence was not ended. It was deleted. A moment later, there was nothing. No bodies, no spiritual pressure, no sign of a struggle. Just a patch of sand and a few petrified trees, now strangely smooth, as if they had been scrubbed clean from the fabric of the universe. The silence that remained was perfect, absolute, and utterly empty. Chapter 2. The Cage of Glass and Bone. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a dull, throbbing ache. It started behind Naruto's eyes and spread through his entire body, a testament to the profound exhaustion he'd pushed past. He didn't open his eyes at first. He just lay there, taking inventory. The swirling water prison was gone. He was on a hard, cool surface. The air was still thin and heavy, but the grit of sand was gone, replaced by a sterile cleanliness. The faint, ever-present hunger of Emilio and souls still echoed at the edge of his senses, a constant, grim chorus. He was inside. He finally cracked his eyes open. The room was spacious, stark, and eerily bright. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of a luminous white material that felt like polished bone and looked like quartz. There were no visible light sources. The entire structure seemed to glow with a soft, internal luminescence. One wall was not a wall at all, but a transparent barrier, like flawless glass, looking out into a vast, cavernous hallway that stretched into the distance. It was less a cell and more a display case. A cage of glass and bone. He pushed himself into a sitting position, his muscles groaning in protest. His chakra was still sluggishly refilling, the process hampered by the alien nature of this world's spiritual energy, or reishi. As he was beginning to understand it, it was like trying to fill a water skin in a room full of smoke. He wasn't chained. His weapons pouch was gone, but he hadn't expected them to leave him armed. The gash in his side was fully healed, leaving only the tattered remains of his jacket as a reminder. He felt a phantom itch where the wound had been, a sign his accelerated healing had done its work. He stood and walked to the transparent wall, placing a hand on its surface. It was cool and unyielding. Through it, he saw the true scale of the place. The hallway outside was monumental, wide enough to drive a column of tanks through. Far in the distance, other Arankar, the human-like hollows, walked the corridors, their movements purposeful. They glanced at his cell as they passed, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, fear, and predatory assessment. He was the new attraction in the zoo. "You are awake." The voice came from the corner of the room. He turned, his body instantly tensing, annoyed at himself for not sensing her. Harribel stood there, her arms crossed. Her mask was gone, revealing a face of stern, regal beauty. The crack in her jacket from his Rasengan had been repaired, and she wore an air of detached authority. With her were her 3 Fracken, standing behind her like a loyal wolf pack. Apache was practically snarling. Mila Rose looked ready for a brawl. And Sung Sun watched him with an air of clinical distaste. "Yeah, I'm a pretty quick healer," Naruto said, his voice still a bit rough. He leaned against the wall, adopting a casual posture that belied the tension coiling in his gut. "Nice place you've got here. A little sterile for my taste. Needs a plant, maybe a window. Your humor is as misplaced as your presence," Harribel stated, her green eyes analytical. "I have questions. You will answer them. Is that how this works?" Naruto countered, pushing off the wall. "You jump me in the desert, lock me in a box, and then expect me to spill my life story. You could have at least offered me some ramen first." Men. Mila Rose repeated the word, stumbling over it. "It is a type of food," Sung Sun sniffed, as if the concept itself were offensive. "Living things are obsessed with it." "Shut up. We're not here to talk about his disgusting habits," Apache snapped, taking a half step forward before a warning glance from Harribel stopped her. Harribel ignored them all, her focus solely on Naruto. "I can be patient. You are my prisoner. Time is a resource I have in abundance. This room will hold you." The walls are infused with a spiritual sealant that dampens energy projection. "You will not break out as you did before." Naruto's eyes flickered around the room, really sensing it this time. She was right. There was a subtle, complex web of energy woven into the very structure of the cell, designed to suppress and contain. It was clever. It would probably work on most beings. He, however, was not most beings. He felt the faint connection to natural energy was still there, thin as a spider's thread, but present. If he needed to, he could still access Sage Mode. It would be difficult, like breathing through a straw, but not impossible. He kept that particular card close to his chest. "All right, fine," he said with a sigh, sitting cross-legged on the floor. He gestured for her to continue. "Ask away. But it's a two-way street. I've got questions of my own." Harribel seemed to consider this for a moment, then gave a curt nod. It was a reasonable proposition. "Agreed. Let us begin with the first and most important question. What are you?" Quote, "I'm human," Naruto said simply. "Do not insult my intelligence," she replied, her voice dropping a dangerous half-octave. "No human possesses the power you displayed. You shattered my Tiburon with your bare hands. You create solid duplicates of yourself. Your energy feels like a star. You are not human. Human plus." Then, Naruto shrugged. "I'm a shinobi, from a place called the Elemental Nations. The power I use is called chakra. The clones, the ball of energy, all of it. As for the other stuff," he trailed off, thinking. How could he explain the Sage of Six Paths? Or Kurama. It was impossible. Let's just say I had some unique tutors. Harribel's eyes narrowed. Shinobi. The word was familiar. Aizen had spoken of them. Warriors from the living world who used a different form of energy manipulation. But none were rumored to be on this level. This chakra, she pressed. Is it the source of your life force? It's connected, Naruto admitted. It's spiritual and physical energy mixed together. Everyone in my world has it. I just have a lot more than most. That was the understatement of the millennium. Now it's my turn. You called this place Hueco Mundo. World of the hollows. Those things I fought in the desert, they were hollows. But you're not like them. You look human. You talk. What are you? We are Arankar, Harribel answered. We are hollows who have removed our masks and gained the power of a Shinigami. We have transcended our mindless hunger to regain our reason. So you used to be like those things? Naruto asked, a hint of genuine curiosity in his voice. We were all born from the same cycle of predation, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. In Hueco Mundo, there is only one law: consume or be consumed. The weak become sustenance for the strong. That is the nature of our existence. Naruto's brow furrowed. He thought of the cycle of hatred in his own world, the endless wars fought over land, power, and vengeance. It sounded similar, but colder, more fundamental. That's a pretty bleak way to live, he said quietly. A bitter, humorless smile touched Harribel's lips, though it didn't reach her eyes. It is not a way to live. It is a way to survive. You speak of living as if it is a right. Here, it is a privilege earned through strength. No, Naruto said, his voice firm, losing its earlier casual tone. He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw the iron core of his will. Survival isn't enough. Everyone has a right to more than that. Everyone deserves to be safe. To have people they care about. To not have to worry about being eaten. Apache let out a derisive snort. What a stupid, childish idea. The weak exist to be trampled. That's how we got this far. Is it? Naruto shot back, his gaze flicking to the feral Arankar. Or did you just get lucky you weren't trampled first? What happens when someone stronger than you comes along? Does that make it okay for them to trample you? What about her? He nodded toward Harribel. She's stronger than you three. Is that the only reason you follow her? Because you're scared of her. We follow Lady Harribel because she is strong enough to protect us. Mila Rose growled, offended to her core. We would die for her. Exactly, Naruto said, pointing at her. You don't follow her just because she can beat you. You follow her because you trust her. Because you're a team, comrades. That's not the law of consumption. That's something else. The three Fracken fell silent, looking uncertainly at each other and then at Harribel. He had twisted their own loyalty and used it as a weapon against their worldview. Harribel's expression remained unreadable, but a flicker of something new, annoyance, perhaps, or grudging respect, entered her eyes. This prisoner was more than just a powerhouse. He was clever. He understood the bonds between them instinctively. The bonds I share with my Fracken are the exception, not the rule, she stated, reasserting control. They are the reason I seek power. Power to create a world where they no longer need to be afraid. To achieve that, sacrifices must be made. What kind of sacrifices? Naruto asked, his voice low. Those who are too weak to contribute, those who would threaten our stability, they are culled. Resources are finite. The strong must be preserved. It is the logical, necessary cost of leadership. Her words were cold, pragmatic. The philosophy of a queen ruling a kingdom of starving wolves. Naruto fell silent, his gaze distant. He thought of the hard choices the cage had to make. He thought of Danzo, who believed any sacrifice was justified for the good of Konoha. He thought of Nagato, who believed the world needed to feel ultimate pain to understand peace. He had fought against those philosophies his entire life. No, he said, his voice resonating with a certainty that made the air in the room feel heavy. A leader who sacrifices his own people isn't a leader. They're just a butcher picking the choicest cuts for themselves. There's always another way. You just have to be strong enough, and stubborn enough, to find it. He looked directly at Harribel, his blue eyes burning with an intensity that made her feel, for the first time, like the one being interrogated. If you have to sacrifice anyone to protect the people you care about, he said, "it means you're not strong enough." That's all. The silence that followed was absolute. He had not just disagreed with her. He had fundamentally condemned her entire life's philosophy, the code that had allowed her and her Fracken to survive for centuries. He had called her weak. Harribel stared at him, her jaw tight. A storm of conflicting emotions raged behind her calm facade. Anger, indignation, and a tiny, traitorous sliver of doubt. Before she could formulate a response, she turned her head. "Leave us," she commanded her Fracken. But Lady Harribel, Apache started. Now, the command was steel. The three of them hesitated, then bowed their heads and left the room, their retreat punctuated by a final, hateful glare from Apache. They were alone. Harribel walked closer to the transparent wall, her gaze never leaving his. "You speak with the arrogance of one who has never had to make an impossible choice." "I've made nothing but impossible choices," Naruto replied, his voice quiet but firm. "My whole life has been a string of them. The difference is, I refuse to choose who dies. I choose to save everyone. And if I fail, I fail. But I'll never stop trying." She saw no lie in his eyes. Only a deep, unwavering, and utterly insane conviction. He truly believed what he was saying. This man, this anomaly, was not just a being of immense power. He was a being of immense, unshakable will. He was, in his own way, a king. He just didn't have a throne. "We are done for today," she said abruptly, turning away. "Contemplate your position. In Hueco Mundo, your ideals are a death sentence. Maybe," Naruto called after her as she walked toward the door. "Or maybe they're just what this place needs." She didn't look back as she exited the room, the glowing white door ceiling shut behind her. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, her composure finally cracking. She leaned against the wall, her heart hammering in her chest. He had gotten under her skin in a way Aizen, with all his mind games and manipulations, never had. Aizen had preyed on her desire for security. This man, this Naruto Uzumaki, he challenged the very soul of it. Deep within the Seraite, in the bowels of the Shinigami Research and Development Institute, the air hummed with the discordant symphony of 1,000 malfunctioning machines. Alarms blared with a tinny, electronic screech, data scrolled incomprehensibly across dozens of screens. And the scent of ozone and burnt circuits was thick enough to taste. In the center of this chaos stood Captain Mayuri Kuretsuchi, a grotesque figure of science and vanity. He was not panicked. He was furious, incompetent, worthless, pathetic excuses for matter. He shrieked, slamming a gauntleted fist onto a console, which promptly exploded in a shower of sparks. Report. His lieutenant, Nemu Kuretsuchi, stood impassively beside him, her face a perfect mask of neutrality. All 37 deep-cover Reishi probes in Hueco Mundo have simultaneously ceased transmission, Captain. Ceased transmission. Mayuri spun on her, his voice a venomous hiss. "Do not coddle me with sterile language, Nemu. They did not cease transmission. They vanished. One moment they were transmitting standard background radiation data, the next, PFFT. He made a gesture like snuffing out a candle. Gone. Not destroyed, not jammed. Erased from the causal stream. The quantum entanglement links are not broken. They lead to nothing." He stalked over to the primary monitor, which displayed not data, but a patch of sickening, visual static. It wasn't the black and white fuzz of a dead channel. It was a roiling, shifting void that seemed to actively hurt the eyes, a hole in the very concept of information. Analysis. Nemu. Now, the final picosecond of data from probe Epsilon 7 is anomalous. She reported in her monotone voice. It registered a negative value for spiritual particle density. Mayuri froze. He turned to her slowly, a terrifying grin spreading across his painted face. "Negative. Explain." "It is not possible to explain, Captain. It is a logical contradiction. The sensor did not register an absence of reishi. It registered a value less than 0. As if the space itself was actively consuming reality. The sub-protocol designed to analyze unknown phenomena attempted to classify it and suffered a total logic cascade. The probe did not report being destroyed. It reported being unmade." Mayuri's grin widened into a ghastly leer. His earlier fury was gone, replaced by a chilling, rapturous excitement. This was not a malfunction. This was not an enemy he understood. This was something new. A data vacuum. A conceptual weapon, he murmured, his mind racing at 1,000 miles per hour. This was infinitely more interesting than the Irankar. This was a fundamental violation of the laws of spiritual physics. This changes everything. He turned away from the screen, his mind already formulating a dozen horrific experiments. But first, protocol. The disappearance of SRDI assets was one thing. A potential universe-ending paradox was another. He had a duty to report it. And more importantly, reporting it would grant him the authority and resources to study it properly. Prepare a full data packet of the corrupted logs and the final transmission from Epsilon 7, he commanded Nemu. Redact any information pertaining to the probe's, more, unsanctioned surveillance capabilities. Send it to Central 46 with my highest threat assessment classification. Title the report, Existential Void Anomaly. Yes, Captain, Nemu said with a bow. Mayuri cackled, a high, unhinged sound that echoed through the dying shrieks of his lab equipment. Oh, this is wonderful. A true mystery, something to really get my hands dirty with. He strode out of the command center, leaving Nemu to compile the report. The data packet was sent. Within the hour, it was being reviewed by the shadowy, ancient figures of Soul Society's ruling body. Already paranoid aft, R. Eisen's betrayal and the war with the Quincy, the words, existential void anomaly, and the attached, incomprehensible data logs sent a wave of cold fear through them. An emergency session was convened. Old, forbidden scrolls were unfurled, and a name that had not been spoken in 1,000 years was brought forth, Koin Funimori. The Great Purifier, the architect of the Celestial Mandate, A. Kontan, Gensi plan for anomalies that threatened the balance of the worlds was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was now an active consideration. Days bled into one another in the white, luminous prison. Naruto lost track of time. There was no sun, no day or night, only the perpetual, unchanging twilight of Las Noches. Harribel had not returned. Instead, food would appear in his cell, strange, tasteless. Fruits and jerky-like meat that provided sustenance but no pleasure. He was being kept alive, an exhibit under observation. He spent his time meditating, trying to draw in the minuscule traces of natural energy. Slowly building a small reservoir of sage chakra within himself. It was arduous work, but it kept him sane. It was a connection, however tenuous, to the living world he knew. The quiet was shattered by the sound of an explosion. Not a distant one, a very, very close one. The glowing white door to his cell was blasted off its hinges, sent flying across the room to shatter against the far wall. Standing in the smoking doorway was an Irankar Naruto hadn't met, but had sensed. He was tall, leanly muscled, with wild, cyan-colored hair and a confident, bloodthirsty smirk. A fragment of a jawbone mask rested on his cheek, and the whole of a hollow was in his abdomen. The number 6 was tattooed on his back. He radiated an aggressive, untamed power that was second only to Harribel's. It was Grimjow Jagerjackes. So, Grimjow said, his voice a low growl of amusement. He sauntered into the room, cracking his knuckles. You're the little stray Harribel decided to pick up. Don't look like much. Naruto got to his feet, dusting himself off. He wasn't surprised. He had felt this one's impatient, violent energy signature pacing the halls for days. It was only a matter of time. And you must be the welcoming committee. Naruto said, his tone dry. You're a little late, and your knock is terrible. Grimjow laughed, a harsh, grating sound. I don't knock. Harribel wants to talk to you, question you. What a waste of time. I see a powerful intruder. I only have one question. Who's stronger? Me or you? I came to get the answer. He wasn't asking for a fight. He was declaring one. She's not going to be happy you blew up her special prison, Naruto pointed out. Let me worry about Harribel, Grimjow snarled, his smirk widening. She's gone soft, talking to her enemies instead of crushing them. Eisen would have had you dissected on a table by now. But me, I think a good fight is the best way to get to know someone. He vanished in a burst of sonido, appearing directly in front of Naruto, his fist cocked back. Naruto's sage-honed senses, even in their dampened state, screamed a warning. He dropped, the punch whistling over his head with the force of a freight train. He wind of its passage stirring his hair. Naruto spun on the ground, sweeping Grimjow's legs out from under him. The Espada grunted in surprise, but caught himself with one hand, flipping back onto his feet with acrobatic grace. Not bad, Grimjow admitted, his grin turning feral. You've got reflexes. He charged again, a blur of motion in the confined space. This wasn't a duel of techniques, it was a brawl. He threw a furious combination of punches and kicks, each strike powerful enough to pulverize granite. Naruto didn't try to match his strength. He flowed. He became a leaf in the wind, swaying, ducking, and parrying. He used the backs of his hands and the soles of his feet to redirect Grimjow's blows, sending them smashing into the walls of the cell. The luminous material cratered, and cracked under the Irankar's unrestrained power, but it held. Grimjow grew more and more frustrated. He was faster. He was stronger. But none of his attacks were landing. It was like trying to punch water. Stand still and fight me. Coward, he roared, launching a powerful axe kick. Naruto didn't retreat. He stepped into the attack, his body moving inside the arc of the kick. He grabbed Grimjow's descending leg with one hand, twisted his body, and used the Espada's own momentum to flip him over his shoulder. Grimjow slammed into the floor with a resounding crash that shook the entire room. He was on his feet in an instant, rage twisting his features. A crackle of red energy began to gather in his palm. Fine, if you won't fight, then you'll burn. Sero. He thrust his palm forward. He beam of concentrated destruction shot across the small room. Naruto, with no space to dodge, did something that defied Grimjow's understanding of combat. He slapped it, with his open palm, coated in the thinnest, almost invisible layer of chakra. He met the Sero. He didn't block it. He didn't overpower it. He deflected it. The beam of red energy careened off his hand and blasted into the ceiling, showering the room in glowing white debris. Grimjow's jaw fell slack. He stared, utterly dumbfounded. No one slapped a Sero. No one. Naruto used that moment of shock. He closed the distance in a single step. He wasn't aiming a punch or a kick. His movements were precise, efficient. He slipped under Grimjow's guard, grabbed the Espada's right arm, spun behind him, and locked him in an unbreakable hold. One arm twisted behind his back and the other snaked around his neck in a chokehold. It was over. Grimjow thrashed, his immense strength useless against the perfect leverage of the hold. He couldn't break free. He couldn't even breathe properly. You bastard, he choked out, his muscles straining. You wanted a fight, Naruto said, his voice calm and steady in Grimjow's ear. He wasn't even out of breath. I gave you one. Now it's over. You lost. He wasn't mocking him. It was a simple statement of fact. And that, more than anything, was what enraged Grimjow. This stranger, this living thing, had completely and utterly dominated him without throwing a single serious blow. He hadn't just been beaten, he'd been schooled. From the shattered doorway, Harribel watched, her face an unreadable mask. She had sensed Grimjow's Ryutsu spike and had arrived just in time to see the end. She had seen Naruto's effortless evasion, his brilliant redirection of Grimjow's overwhelming force, and the casual, almost disdainful way he had deflected a point-blank Sero. But most importantly, she saw the end. He had Grimjow at his mercy. He could have broken his arm, his neck. He could have killed him. Instead, he simply held him, proving his dominance without causing lasting harm. It was the ultimate display of control. The ultimate act of a warrior who was so confident in his strength that he didn't need to prove it with bloodshed. Naruto felt her presence. He glanced over at her, then loosened his hold, shoving Grimjow away. The Espada stumbled forward, gasping for air, clutching his throat. He spun around, his eyes blazing with humiliation and fury, ready to charge again. Grimjow. Harribel's voice was quiet, but it cut through his rage like a shard of ice. He froze, his gaze snapping to her. That is enough, she said. He looked from her to Naruto, then back again. The fury in his eyes slowly subsided, replaced by a grudging, hateful understanding. He had lost. In front of her, he spat on the floor. This isn't over, he snarled at Naruto, but the threat was hollow. He turned and stalked out of the ruined cell, his pride in tatters. Naruto watched him go, then turned to Harribel. He gave a slight shrug. He seemed stressed. Thought I'd help him blow off some steam. Harribel walked into the room, stepping over the debris. She looked at the cracked walls, the hole in the ceiling. And then at Naruto, who stood there looking completely unharmed. She had imprisoned him to study him, to understand the threat he posed. But now, she was beginning to see something else. He wasn't a mindless beast. He wasn't a cruel invader. He was a warrior, but one who fought with a code she didn't understand. A code that valued restraint over destruction, and control over killing. He had just defeated the Sexta Espada as if he were disciplining a child. Her prisoner was not the threat. His philosophy was, and it was infinitely more dangerous to the world she knew. Your abilities are considerable, she said, the words feeling inadequate. I get by, Naruto replied. He looked at the wreckage around them. So, am I still your guest? Or just the guy who helps with your interior decorating? A long silence stretched between them. Harribel's gaze was intense, her mind working furiously. She had brought a force of nature into her fortress, and it refused to be caged or categorized. For now, she said finally, her voice betraying nothing, you remain my guest. But it seems your accommodations require an upgrade. She was beginning to realize that the cage of GL. Ass and Bone was not meant to keep him in. It was meant to keep her world out. And it was failing. Chapter 3. The Unwilling Champion. The days following Naruto's spar with Grimmjow were different. He was moved from the shattered display case to a suite of rooms higher up in the fortress of Las Noches. They were still stark and white, but they were larger, furnished with a simple bed and table, the transparent wall now overlooked the vast, moonlit desert instead of a hallway. It was an upgrade, but a cage was still a cage. The attitude of the Arrancar towards him had shifted. The open curiosity was gone, replaced by a mixture of fear and a deep, grudging respect. Whispers followed him whenever he was escorted from his room. They called him El Dorado, the Golden One, a name born from the stories of his brief, explosive use of power in the desert. He was no longer just an anomaly, he was a benchmark. Grimmjow, the famously arrogant Sexta Espada, had challenged him and had been publicly, effortlessly humbled. That single act carried more weight in this world of predators than 1,000 of Naruto's philosophical arguments. Harribel continued her interrogations, but their nature had changed. They were less like a captor questioning a prisoner and more like two sovereigns exchanging intelligence. She would bring him reports of the state of Hueco Mundo, of factional squabbles, of resource shortages, of the constant, grinding struggle for survival, and he would listen, offering observations that were often shockingly insightful. In turn, he learned the history of the Arrancar, of Aizen's rise and fall, and of the precarious peace Harribel had forged in the power vacuum. He learned that she wasn't a tyrant. She was a pragmatist, burdened by a responsibility she had never sought. Her cold philosophy of sacrifice was not born of cruelty, but of a desperate, weary love for her three Fracken and the people who had flocked to her banner seeking stability. She was a shark who had learned to be a shepherd, and the strain of it was a constant, invisible weight upon her. One evening, she stood before the transparent wall of his room, her back to him as she stared out at the unchanging desert. Aizen believed that ultimate power could be achieved by blurring the lines between Hollow and Shinigami, she said, her voice distant. He sought transcendence. He failed. Power isn't the goal, Naruto said from where he sat on the floor, meditating. It's a tool. Aizen had a really powerful hammer, so all he saw were nails. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. And your power dwarfs his. What do you see? Naruto opened his eyes, their blue depths clear and direct. I see people who need help. I see a world that's hurting. And I have the tools to fix it. That's all. His simplicity was, as always, disarming and deeply profound. He didn't speak of glory, or control, or even justice. He spoke of fixing things, like a carpenter looking at a broken chair. Before she could respond, a tremor ran through the entire fortress. It wasn't violent, but it was deep, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the world. Both of them tensed instantly. Harribel's hand went to the hilt of her new Tiburon, a replacement forged in the armories of Las Noches, identical to the one he had shattered. Naruto rose to his feet, his senses spreading out like a net. What was that? He asked. Harribel's eyes were wide, her spiritual senses focused on a distant point in the desert. An eruption, she whispered, a note of disbelief in her voice. From the forest of Manos. From her tone, Naruto knew this was something far more significant than a simple earthquake. A moment later, a frantic Arankar soldier appeared at the door, skidding to a halt and bowing deeply. Lady Harribel, a spiritual pressure eruption in the east. It is massive, ancient, we believe it is Xylos. At the name, a chill went through the room. Even Naruto, who didn't know the name, could feel the sudden spike of fear from the guard. Harribel's face, usually a mask of calm control, had gone pale. Are you certain? She demanded. The signature is unmistakable, my lady. It is a torrent of raw, furious power. It is on the move. And it is coming. Here. Xylos? Naruto asked, stepping closer. Who's Xylos? Harribel turned to him, her green eyes dark with grim understanding. A relic. A holdout from the time before Aizen, from the brutal court of the previous king, Barrigan Lusenbairn. Xylos is a vasto lord of immense power, a creature of pure, mindless rage who refused to evolve. He never bowed to Barrigan, and he never bowed to Aizen. He slumbered deep within the Manos forest, a sleeping god of destruction. Your presence here, the surge of power from your fight with Grimmjow, it must have awakened him. And like all things in this world, he is drawn to the greatest source of power. Drawn to me, Naruto finished, his expression hardening. It was always the same. His very existence was a magnet for trouble. He will not stop, Harribel said, her voice regaining its command. He will not reason. He will only destroy. He will tear Los Noches apart to get to you. She turned to the guard. Sound the alarm. All Espada and their Fracken to the eastern wall. Prepare for a full-scale defensive engagement. The guard vanished in a flash of Sonido. Harribel turned to leave, but Naruto stepped in her path. I'll handle it, he said. She looked at him, surprised. You are a prisoner. This is our fight. It's coming for me, Naruto countered. His voice leaving no room for argument. It's my responsibility. Let me out. Let me face it. Absolutely not, she said, her tone final. You are an unknown quantity. I will not risk the safety of my people by gambling on your intentions. My forces will handle this. Your forces will die, Naruto said bluntly. The raw, chaotic power he sensed from this Xylos was immense, far beyond anything he had felt from Grimmjow or even Harribel herself. It was less a warrior and more a natural disaster. They will throw themselves at it, and it will slaughter them, and you will have sacrificed them for nothing. I told you, there's always another way. His words hit her like a physical blow. He was throwing her own philosophy, and his condemnation of it, back in her face at the worst possible moment. You will remain here, she commanded, her voice like ice. She pushed past him and strode out of the room, leaving him alone as the fortress of Los Noches came alive with the blaring horns of war. Naruto stood in the center of his room, listening to the frantic sounds of preparation. He could feel the approaching spiritual pressure, a tidal wave of mindless fury that grew stronger with every passing second. He could feel the fear of the weaker Arankar in the fortress, a palpable, cloying terror that reminded him of civilians cowering during Pain's assault on Konoha. He walked to the transparent wall and placed his hand on it. He could feel the sealing energy woven within, a complex, suffocating net. He closed his eyes, focusing. He could try to brute force his way through it. A full-powered Rasenshuriken would probably do it. But it would take time, and it would drain his reserves before the real fight even began. He remembered what he'd said to Harribel. There's always another way. He let his hand fall and sat down, crossing his legs. He closed his eyes, and the world went away. He was no longer in the cage of glass and bone. He was in the quiet, sun-dappled forest of Mount Myoboku. He could feel the vibrant, humming life of the world around him, the rich, clean taste of natural energy. It was a memory, a feeling he held onto, an anchor point in the Dead Sea of Hueco Mundo. He began to draw on the energy of this world, not with force, but with finesse. He didn't pull, he invited. He was a master of sage mode, a perfect sage. He didn't just take natural energy, he harmonized with it. Even here, in this desolate land, there were whispers of it. In the strange petrified trees, in the quartz sand, in the very spiritual fabric of the dimension. It was faint, distorted, and tasted of dust and sorrow, but it was there. The sealing formula in the walls was designed to stop a projection of power, an outward burst. It was a dam, but Naruto wasn't trying to break the dam. He was becoming the river, letting his senses seep through the microscopic cracks, flowing with the energy already present in the structure. Slowly, carefully, he extended his consciousness beyond the room, past the walls, through the corridors of Las Noches, and out into the open desert. He found what he was looking for. The eastern wall of Las Noches was a scene of controlled chaos. Hundreds of Arankar lined the ramparts, their weapons drawn. At the forefront stood the Espada, or what was left of them. Harribel stood in the center, flanked by her Fracken. Grimjow was there, a feral grin on his face, eager for a true battle. A towering, skeletal Arankar, the Noveno Espada, and a flamboyant, pink-haired scientist, the Octava Espada Xyeloporo Grants, stood with their own followers. They all stared out at the horizon, where a colossal cloud of sand was approaching at an alarming speed. At its center was the source of the crushing spiritual pressure that was making the very air tremble. Then, they saw him. Xylos was a nightmare of bone and fury given form. He was gargantuan, easily 3 times the size of the fortress wall, a vaguely draconic creature made of jagged, obsidian-like bone. He had no legs, instead slithering across the sand on 1,000 smaller, centipede-like appendages. His face was a massive, cracked skull with a gaping maw filled with countless rows of shark-like teeth. And his eyes were nothing but pits of burning, hateful red energy. A single, twisted horn grew from his forehead, pulsing with raw power. He wasn't just a vasto lord, he was a primal god of destruction. By the abyss, Xyeloporo murmured, his usual scientific detachment replaced by a flicker of genuine awe and fear. The Ryutsu readings are off the scale. He's stronger than a Shinigami captain. He's a monster, Grimjow growled, his knuckles white where he gripped his sword. A real monster. This is gonna be fun. Do not be a fool, Grimjow, Harribel said, her gaze fixed on the approaching behemoth. His power is undirected, but absolute. A frontal assault is suicide. We will use coordinated Sero volleys to cripple his advance. All units, on my mark. The beast, Xylos, let out a roar. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical force, a wave of pure sonic power and spiritual pressure that washed over them. The weaker Arankar on the walls cried out, clutching their heads as they were assaulted by the sheer, mindless killing intent. The very walls of Las Noches groaned under the strain. From his maw, a gargantuan Sero began to form, not the focused beam of an Espada, but a chaotic, swirling ball of destructive energy the size of a building. He was going to obliterate the entire wall in a single attack. Fire! Harribel commanded. 100 Seros, from the thin, precise beams of the lower ranks to the powerful blasts of the Espada, shot across the desert and converged on the charging Vasto Lord. The combined attack was immense, a brilliant torrent of red energy that struck Xylos square in the chest. The explosion was colossal. It kicked up a mountain of sand and smoke, obscuring the beast from view. For a moment, there was a hopeful silence. It did not last. A furious, enraged bellow echoed from within the smoke cloud, and the form of Xylos charged out of it, its obsidian armor scorched and cracked, but fundamentally unharmed. The combined Su of Las Noches' greatest warriors had done little more than annoy it. Its own Sero was fully charged. It unleashed the attack. The chaotic sphere of death flew toward the wall. Harribel's eyes widened. She knew they couldn't block it. They couldn't evade it. That single attack would shatter their defenses and kill hundreds. She gathered her own power, preparing to unleash her strongest attack, Cascada, to meet it. Knowing it would be a futile, sacrificial gesture. She was a queen. This was her duty. And then, something impossible happened. From high above, something fell from the night sky. It was huge, dark, and it landed directly in the path of the oncoming Sero with an earth-shattering thud. It was a toad, a gigantic, monstrously huge toad, larger than any building in Konoha, claw. D in a blue happy coat and carrying a dosu blade slung across its back. It had a pipe clenched in its mouth and a look of supreme irritation on its face. It was Gamabunta, the chief toad of Mount Myoboku. What in the hells? Grimjow breathed, staring at the impossible sight. The other Arankar were similarly stunned into silence. Gamabunta didn't even look at them. He saw the city-sized ball of destructive energy coming his way. Naruto, you got some real nerve, summoning me to a place with no water for my pipe and then expecting me to take that thing head on. He grumbled, his voice a bass rumble that shook the ground. He drew his massive blade, the metal scraping with a sound like a landslide. Well, here goes nothing. He swung. The colossal blade, infused with his own sage chakra, met the Sero. The impact was apocalyptic, but instead of exploding, the Sero was cut. Gamabunta's blade, a tool of perfect sage power, sliced through the chaotic energy, cleaving it in two. The 2 hectares. Elves of the Sero veered harmlessly past the fortress walls and impacted miles away in the desert, sending up 2 mushroom clouds of sand and fury. Silence. Utter, profound, disbelieving silence. The Arankar on the wall stared. Harribel stared, her own attack dissipating, forgotten. Xylos, the rampaging god, skidded to a halt, its mindless rage momentarily replaced by confusion. A toad had just AP. Paired from nowhere and cut its ultimate attack in half. And then they saw him. Standing on Gamabunta's head, arms crossed, his orange jacket whipping in the wind, was Naruto Uzumaki. The orange pygmy, Entation of Sage Mode was blazing around his eyes. He hadn't broken out of his prison. He had summoned his way out. Sorry I'm late, Naruto called down to the stunned crowd, a confident grin on his face. Traffic was a killer. He looked from the shocked faces of the Arankar to the furious, confused Vasto Lord. He then turned his gaze to Harribel, his grin softening into something more serious. You are going to get yourself killed, he said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. That's not leadership, it's just leaving your people alone. Her breath hitched, his words from their first real conversation. Thrown back at her again. But this time, they weren't a condemnation. They were a promise. A promise that she wasn't alone. Xylos, its confusion replaced by renewed, focused rage, let out another deafening roar. It had found the source of the power it craved. It was the small, golden figure standing on the toad's head. Bun-chan, you handle the small fry if they get close, Naruto said. Patting Gamabunta's head, this big guy is all mine. Don't call me Bun-chan. The toad grumbled, but he settled into a ready stance, his massive form a bulwark between Xylos and Las Noches. Naruto leapt. He didn't fall. He shot from Gamabunta's head like a golden cannonball, hurtling directly towards the Vasto Lord. He's insane, Apache screamed, watching from the wall. Xylos swiped at the incoming gnat with a claw the size of a house. Naruto, blazing with the golden light of his chakra mixing with the pure energy of Sage Mode, didn't dodge. He met the claw with his fist. The impact shattered the sound barrier. A sonic boom echoed across the desert, and a shockwave of pure force blasted outwards, flattening the dunes for miles. The Arankar on the walls were thrown back, shielding their eyes from the brilliant flash of light. When they looked again, they saw a sight that would be burned into their collective memory for eternity. Naruto had stopped the claw. His single, small fist was holding back the immense, continent-shattering strength of the Vasto Lord. Cracks were forming, not on his arm, but on the obsidian bone of Xylos's claw. With a roar of his own, a cry filled with the power of the sun. Naruto pushed. The claw didn't just stop, it was thrown back. He ran up the Vasto Lord's colossal arm, a tiny golden figure against a mountain of black bone, moving with impossible speed. Xylos thrashed, trying to shake him off, but Naruto was like a burr, sticking to it, his chakra-infused feet finding purchase on its hide. He ran up its back, heading for its head. The beast opened its maw, firing a volley of smaller, faster Seros at him. Naruto weaved through them, the red beams of death missing him by inches, his movements a blur of gold. He reached the back of its massive skull. He placed both hands on the thick, obsidian bone. He can't possibly break through that. Grimmjow yelled, a note of awe in his voice. Its hierro is stronger than the fortress itself. Naruto wasn't trying to break it. He closed his eyes, his sage mode senses plunging deep into the creature. He felt its rage, its hunger, its pain. It was a consciousness that had existed for millennia, trapped in a cycle of mindless destruction. It was, in its own way, incredibly lonely. He didn't use a Rasengan. He didn't use a destructive jutsu. He pushed his own chakra, his own life force, into the beast. It wasn't an attack, it was an offering. He projected his own memories, his own feelings, the loneliness of his childhood, the joy of finding his first friends, the fierce determination to protect his home. He flooded the Vasto Lord's mind not with violence, but with empathy. Deep within him, Kurama grumbled. You and your sentimental nonsense, Kit. Just blow its head off and be done with it. That's your solution to everything, you grumpy furball, Naruto shot back mentally. Try my way for once. Xylos froze. Its titanic struggles ceased. The burning red light in its eyes flickered, replaced by a deep, profound confusion. It felt something new. Something other than rage. It felt a connection. The beast slowly, ponderously, lowered its head to the ground. It lay there, quiescent, the immense, crushing spiritual pressure that had terrified a nation simply gone. It was still a monster, still a god of destruction, but its will to destroy had been pacified. Naruto, his sage mode fading, slid down its massive horn and landed softly on the sand in front of its snout. He reached out and placed a hand on its obsidian hide. The beast let out a low, mournful rumble, a sound not of anger, but of something ancient and tired finally finding peace. He had not killed the monster. He had tamed it. He turned and looked back at the wall of Las Noches. 1,000 Arankar stared at him in dead, stunned silence. Their greatest nightmare, a force of nature that their combined might could not even scratch, had been subdued by this one man. And he had done it not with superior destruction, but with an act of incomprehensible mercy. Harribel stood frozen, her hand still half raised from her aborted attack. She watched him, a small, lone figure standing before a pacified god. The first rays of the false dawn of Hueco Mundo glinting off his blonde hair. He had saved them all. He had proven his philosophy was not the naive rambling of a child, but the practical application of a power so immense it could afford to be gentle. He hadn't just defeated the monster. He had defeated her worldview. In that moment, she saw the truth. He was not a prisoner. He was not a threat. He was their salvation, an unwilling champion who had just claimed a victory for a kingdom he didn't even belong to. And in the depths of her guarded, pragmatic heart, a feeling she had long buried under layers of duty and sacrifice began to stir. It was a dangerous, terrifying, and utterly undeniable warmth. Chapter 4. The Empty Throne. The silence that followed the taming of Xylos was more profound than any roar. It was a vacuum of disbelief, a shared, collective moment where the fundamental laws of Hueco Mundo had been publicly and spectacularly shattered. The law of consumption, of strength through destruction, had been rendered obsolete by a single act of impossible mercy. Naruto Uzumaki, the stranger, the prisoner, El Dorado, stood alone in the vast expanse of white sand, his hand resting on the snout of a pacified god of destruction. The image was a new scripture being written into the soul of every Arankar who witnessed it. On the eastern wall, the tension broke. It wasn't a cheer, not yet. It was a murmur, a ripple of whispers that grew into a wave of stunned conversation. He didn't kill it. He calmed it down, like a pet. What kind of power is that? Grimjow stared, his jaw hanging slightly open. The feral grin he'd worn in anticipation of a glorious battle was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He was a creature of instinct, of the pure joy of combat. He understood power. He understood overwhelming force. He did not, on any level, understand what he had just seen. This wasn't a victory in a fight. This was a redefinition of what a fight could be. Xyeloporo Grants, the Octava Espada, was practically vibrating with scientific ecstasy. He was furiously making notes on a small device he'd produced from his sleeve. Fascinating. A bio-spiritual resonance feedback loop. Not an attack on the body or the soul, but a direct interface with the core consciousness. A pacification wave. The applications are limitless. I must have him. I must dissect him. His frantic whispers were ignored by those around him, who were still lost in their awe. Harribel alone remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable. But inside, a tempest was raging. He had done it. He had done exactly what he said he would do. He had found another way. He had saved them all without sacrificing a single soldier, without firing a single shot in anger. He had faced down an apocalypse and turned it into a miracle. Her philosophy, the cold, hard pragmatism that had been her shield and her sword for centuries, lay in ruins at her feet. The sacrifices she had made, the hard choices that had haunted her, suddenly seemed not just tragic, but unnecessary. It was a devastating, liberating, and terrifying realization. Naruto gave Xylos's snout a final, reassuring pat, then turned and began the long walk back toward Las Noches. Gamabunta, with a final, grumpy puff of his pipe, vanished in a massive cloud of smoke, his purpose served. As Naruto approached, the ranks of the Arankar on the wall parted instinctively, a path clearing for him as if he were a king returning from a victorious campaign. He leapt up onto the rampart, landing softly in front of Harribel. He looked tired, the divine power of sage mode having retreated, leaving the weary but resilient young man in its place. "See," he said, his voice quiet, meant for her alone. No one had to die. She could only nod, the words caught in her throat. Her emerald eyes, usually so guarded, were wide with a turmoil of emotions she couldn't begin to name. Respect, awe, gratitude, and something else, something warmer and more frightening that was taking root in the foundation of her soul. He had become a legend. But in a world built on a hierarchy of strength, a legend was a dangerous thing to be. It was a challenge to the established order. In the days that followed, the atmosphere within Las Noches transformed. The fear of Naruto had evaporated, replaced by a zealous, almost religious reverence. Arankar would fall silent and bow their heads as he passed, now allowed to walk the halls with only a token guard. He was no longer a prisoner, but a revered guest, a living icon of a new kind of power. He used his new, informal status to explore the fortress. He found their training grounds, where Arankar brutalized each other in spars that often ended in serious injury or death. He found their mess halls, where the grim, silent consumption of spiritual sustenance felt more like a chore than a meal. He saw a society built on fear, dominance, and a hollow pride that masked a deep, collective despair. And he began to change it. He started in the training yards. He stepped into a spar between two hot-headed numeros who were about to kill each other over a perceived slight. He disarmed them both with two swift, non-lethal movements. "Fighting to kill your own comrades is stupid," he declared to the gathered crowd. "You're weakening your own army. From now on, you train to improve, not to maim. You train to fight together." Under the watchful, grudging eye of Grimmjow, who Harribel had assigned to observe him, Naruto introduced the concept of teamwork. He taught them drills, formations, coordinated attacks. He showed them how to cover each other's weaknesses and amplify their strengths. At first, they were resistant, their predatory instincts rebelling against the idea of relying on another. But Naruto led by example, using his shadow clones to demonstrate complex maneuvers, his endless energy and infectious enthusiasm slowly winning them over. He was a natural teacher, a born leader. And the Arankar, who had only ever known dominance, began to respond to genuine charisma. But not everyone was swayed by the new gospel of El Dorado. In a shadowy, opulent section of Las Noches, far from the common areas, a different kind of power resided. It was not the brute force of a warrior, but the insidious influence of a politician. "He is a cancer." The words were spoken by a slender, elegant Arankar with smooth, dark skin and immaculate white robes. His mask fragment was a delicate, ornate piece that covered his left eye like a masquerade mask, and his spiritual pressure was a cold, subtle thing, easy to overlook but deeply powerful. This was Xylus, a survivor. He had been a member of the original Espada under Barragan, a contemporary of Aizen's initial recruits. He had survived the transition of power by being too clever to oppose Aizen directly and too useful to discard. He was a master of intrigue and a fervent traditionalist. He addressed a small, clandestine gathering of other old guard Arankar, powerful numeros and former Fracken who resented Harribel's rule and were disgusted by the veneration of this outsider. "This, Livin' G thing speaks of mercy and teamwork," Xylus continued, his voice a smooth, venomous whisper. "These are words of the weak. They are the philosophies of prey. He pacifies a vasto lord instead of consuming its power. He teaches our warriors to rely on each other instead of on their own strength. This is not leadership, it is poison." He is eroding the very foundation of what it means to be a hollow, what it means to be strong. Harribel allows it, one of the assembled Arankar growled, a hulking beast of a man with a boar-like mask. She seems captivated by him. Her feelings have made her weak. Xylus said with a dismissive wave of his hand. She sees a new, powerful weapon to protect her precious pets. She does not see that he is fundamentally altering our nature. Hueco Mundo is a crucible. It is meant to be harsh, to forge the strong from the bones of the weak. This, Naruto, is trying to put out the fire. If he is allowed to continue, we will all become soft. We will become cattle, waiting for a stronger predator to arrive from the Soul Society or elsewhere. He paused, letting his words sink in. He saw the fear and resentment in their eyes and knew he had them. Harribel will not act, he stated. She is compromised. Therefore, we must. The body of Hueco Mundo must be purged of its cancer. And the head, which has allowed the sickness to fester, must also be removed. The implication was clear. It was treason. What are you proposing? Another Arankar asked, a nervous tremor in her voice. Xylus smiled, a cold, predatory expression. A correction. A restoration of the natural order. Harribel will have an accident. Unfortunate, but necessary. In the ensuing chaos, all eyes will turn to the most likely suspect, the volatile, ambitious Grimjow Jagerjackes. While they fight amongst themselves, we will eliminate the true target, the golden intruder. When the dust settles, a new, strong leader will be needed to restore order. A leader who understands the old ways. He let that hang in the air. His meaning obvious. It was a brilliant, simple, and ruthless plan. It exploited the existing tensions within Los Noches and aimed to remove all his rivals in a single, decisive stroke. The time for talk is over, Xylus declared. The time for action is now. For the true nature of Hueco Mundo. Naruto stood on a high balcony with Harribel, looking down at the training yards. Below, two teams of Arankar were running a complex combat drill he had designed, their movements synchronized, their seros fired in coordinated volleys. There was still a rough, competitive edge to it, but for the first time, they were fighting as a unit. You have changed them, Harribel said, her voice soft. She no longer wore her mask fragment. Since the battle with Xylos, she had left it in her chambers. A silent admission that the walls she had built around herself were no longer necessary. I just gave them a better way to get strong, Naruto replied, watching with a proud smile. Fighting each other is a dead end. Fighting together, there's no limit to how strong you can become. He looked at her, in the pale moonlight of Hueco Mundo, with her stern facade softened. He saw the immense burden she carried. He saw the loneliness of the throne. It was a loneliness he understood all too well. You've been carrying all of this on your own for a long time, haven't you? He asked gently. She was startled by the directness of the question. She looked away, back at the desert. It is the duty of a ruler. It's the duty of a friend to help, he said. He didn't move closer, didn't touch her. He just stood there, his presence a warm, steady anchor in her world of cold survival. You don't have to do it alone. A feeling she couldn't identify, a fluttering warmth in her chest, spread through her. For so long, her connections had been based on the roles of leader and subordinate, protector and protected. This was different. This was a connection of equals. Before she could find the words to respond, his head snapped up, his easygoing expression vanished, replaced by a look of cold, sharp fury. What is it? She asked, instantly on alert. Ambush, he said, his voice a low growl. His sage senses, always passively active now in the energy-rich environment of Los Noches, had detected a sudden, coordinated spike of killing intent from the corridor behind them. It was aimed directly at her. Time seemed to slow down. He didn't shout a warning. He didn't look for the attackers. He acted. He grabbed her arm, spun her behind him, and shoved her back, putting his body between her and the doorway. In the same fluid motion, he drew a kunai from the pouch he'd been allowed to keep again. Four figures blurred out of the hallway, their movements silent, their attacks aimed to kill. They were Xylus's chosen assassins. A blade of pure spiritual energy, a variant of Sonido that cut the air itself, shot toward where Harribel's heart had been a second before. It met Naruto's kunai with a screech of protesting metal. He deflected the blow, the force of it jarring his arm. Two other assassins materialized on either side, their swords flashing. Naruto didn't have time for a jutsu. He released his kunai, grabbed their wrists with his bare hands, and used their own momentum to slam them into each other with a sickening crunch of bone. The fourth attacker, a specialist in Kido-like energy attacks, launched a volley of binding spells from a distance. Ropes of black energy shot forward to entangle him. Futon. Rasengan. Naruto formed the jutsu in a fraction of a second. Not the massive version, but a small, controlled sphere of wind-natured chakra. He didn't throw it, he thrust it forward, and the microscopic wind blades that composed it shredded the incoming energy bindings into harmless particles. The entire counterattack took less than 2 seconds. 4 elite assassins were neutralized, 2 of them groaning on the floor with broken bones, the other 2 staring in shock at their failed attacks. Harribel watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had sensed the attack, but her reaction time would have been a fraction of a second too slow. He hadn't just saved her. He had anticipated the attack before it was even launched. Naruto's eyes were cold fire. He turned his gaze on the 2 conscious assassins. "Who sent you?" he demanded. They sneered, their fanatical loyalty to Xylus overcoming their fear. "For the true king," one of them yelled, and bit down hard. A small vial hidden in his tooth ruptured, and he collapsed, black foam frothing at his lips. The other quickly followed suit. They had chosen suicide over capture. "Damn it," Naruto muttered, frustration mixing with his anger. He turned back to Harribel. "Are you all right?" She nodded, still shaken. Not by the attack, but by the effortless, brutal efficiency with which he had protected her. "I am. Thanks to you." Her guards, alerted by the commotion, finally arrived. Their faces a mixture of panic and shame. Grimmjow was with them, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. The 2 dead assassins, the 2 groaning on the floor, and Naruto and Harribel, completely unharmed. "What happened?" Grimmjow demanded. "An assassination attempt," Harribel said, her voice regaining its cold authority. "On me." Grimmjow's eyes narrowed dangerously. An attack on the queen was an attack on all of them. "Who?" They weren't keen on talking, Naruto said, nudging one of the dead assassins with his foot. "Something about a true king." The phrase hung in the air. A true king. The obvious implication pointed to someone with ambition. Someone like Grimmjow. The Sexta Espada's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "You think I did this?" he snarled, looking from Naruto to Harribel. "You think I'd use cowardly assassins?" "It is the logical conclusion," a smooth voice said from the end of the corridor. Xylus appeared, a look of curated concern on his face. He surveyed the scene, an attack on Lady Harribel, and the ambitious Sexta Espada as the first on the scene. How very convenient. He had sprung his trap perfectly. Grimmjow rounded on him. "You slimy bastard. You're framing me." "Am I?" Xylus replied with a calm smile. "Or am I merely stating the obvious? Everyone knows you covet the throne." The tension was thick enough to cut. The guards looked uncertainly between Grimmjow and Xylus. The seeds of civil war were being sown right before their eyes. "Enough." Naruto's voice cut through the chaos. All eyes turned to him. He was no longer the cheerful teacher or the weary traveler. He was the warrior who had tamed a god, and his voice carried an authority that no one could ignore. He walked over to one of the assassins groaning on the floor, hauled him to his feet, and looked him dead in the eye. "I'm only going to ask you one more time. Who sent you?" The assassin spat a mouthful of blood at him. "Go to hell, outsider." Naruto sighed. "I really didn't want to do this." He placed his hand on the Arankar's head. He didn't use a Yamanaka clan technique, his method was far more direct. He pushed a sliver of his sage chakra directly into the man's neural pathways, overwhelming his consciousness. The assassin's eyes rolled back in his head. "Xylus," the assassin whispered, his voice a dead monotone. It was Lord Xylus. He planned it all. Reign Grimmjow. Kill the outsider, take the throne. The confession hung in the air, a death sentence. Xylus's calm demeanor shattered, his face twisted into a mask of pure fury. He had been so close. This golden-haired demon had unraveled his perfect plan in seconds. Lies. He is manipulating his mind. Xylus shrieked, but it was too late. The other Arankar were now staring at him, their expras Scions a mixture of shock and dawning fury. They had been played. Xylus knew it was over. With a desperate snarl, he made his move. He didn't run. He lunged, not at Naruto, but at Harribel, a black blade of energy forming in his hand. If he was going down, he would take the queen with him. He never made it. A blur of blue and white intercepted him. Grimmjow, moving with incandescent rage, slammed into Xylus. His own sword meeting the energy blade with a deafening clang. Your fight is with me, traitor. Grimmjow roared, his loyalty to Harribel, a complex thing born of respect for her strength. And their shared history, overriding his personal ambition. But before their fight could truly begin, Naruto ended it. He appeared between them, a silent flicker of motion. He didn't use a weapon. He delivered a single, precise chop to the back of Xylus's neck. The traitor's eyes went wide with shock, and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious but alive. Naruto stood over his fallen form, his expression grim. He looked at Grimmjow, whose sword was still raised, and then at the assembled, shocked Arrancar. He saw a kingdom on the brink of tearing itself apart. He saw a people who desperately needed a leader but had no one they could universally trust. He looked at Harribel. She was staring at him, her face pale, the full weight of the situation crashing down on her. Her rule was fragile. Her life was a target. Her people were divided. She was strong, but she was not the anchor they needed. He was. She walked toward him, her steps measured and deliberate. She stopped in front of him, the unconscious form of Xylus at their feet. The entire corridor was silent, every Arrancar watching, waiting. This was a crossroads, a moment that would define the future of their world. This throne, she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the hall. It is a target. I have held it to give our people a semblance of stability. But my strength is not enough to unite them. My rule will only lead to more of this. She gestured to the bodies, the broken trust. She looked him directly in the eye, her vulnerability a weapon more powerful than any sword. They do not fear you anymore, she said. They revere you. Your strength is absolute, but your heart is not a tyrant's. They will follow you. Grimmjow will follow your strength. She glanced at the Sexta Espada, who looked away, but did not disagree. The others will follow your legend. You can protect them in a way I no longer can. She took a breath, and made the ultimate sacrifice. Not of her life, but of her power. Her crown. Rule them, Naruto Uzumaki. The throne of Hueco Mundo is empty. Take it. Be our king. The offer was laid bare. Not a prize, but a burden. Not a reward, but a life sentence. Naruto looked at her, at the desperate hope in her eyes. He looked at the Arrancar, who were watching him with a mixture of awe and expectation. He looked at the cold, white halls of Las Noches. This was not his home. These were not his people. He was a hero of Konoha, destined to be Hokage. But Konoha was gone. His world was lost to him. What was he now? A traveler with no destination. A god with no one to protect. He looked back at Harribel. He saw not just a queen, but a woman who was offering him not just her kingdom, but her trust. Her faith. In that moment, he realized that home wasn't a place you were from. It was a place where you were needed. He had never wanted a crown. He had never sought power. But he had never, ever turned his back on people who needed him. He didn't give her an answer. Not yet. The weight of the question was too immense. He simply looked at her, a thousand impossible thoughts racing through his mind, and the future of an entire world hung on his unspoken word. Chapter 5. The Crown of Bone. The aftermath of Xylus's failed coup was a quiet poison seeping into the foundations of Las Noches. The traitor and his company conspirators were imprisoned in the deepest levels of the fortress. But their actions had exposed a fracture in the soul of the Arrancar. Harribel's offer hung in the air, a momentous, terrifying question that no one dared speak of, yet everyone was thinking about. The throne of Hueco Mundo was vacant, not in fact, but in spirit. Naruto's lack of an immediate answer was not seen as a refusal. It was seen as the deliberation of a true leader weighing a burden of immense gravity. He retreated into himself, spending long hours in meditation on the high balcony, the same one where Harribel had been attacked. He wasn't just contemplating the offer. He was grieving. Accepting the crown of this dead world felt like a final admission that his own world, his home, was truly gone. It was one thing to be stranded, it was another to plant a flag and declare the exile permanent. Harribel gave him space. She understood, better than anyone, the weight of what she had asked. She went about the duties of her rule, her commands crisp, her demeanor as controlled as ever. But her Fracken saw the change in her. The subtle tension in her shoulders was gone, replaced by a quiet watchfulness. She was waiting for his answer, and the fate of their world was balanced on that single point. The one who could not accept the silence was Grimmjow. He found Naruto on the balcony 2 days after the offer had been made. The sky was its usual starless black, the broken moon a sliver of bone overhead. Still thinking? Grimmjow asked, his voice a low growl. He didn't approach too closely, keeping a respectful distance. His own humiliation at Naruto's hands had been orged by recent events into something new, a warrior's absolute acknowledgement of superior strength. It's a big decision, Naruto said without opening his eyes. There's nothing to think about, Grimmjow spat, his impatience flaring. She offered you the crown. A real king would take it. Or refuse it. This waiting, this is the response of a coward. Naruto's eyes snapped open, his calm blue gaze pinning the Sexta Espada. I'm not a king, Grimmjow. I'm a shinobi. My loyalty is to my village. A traitorous part of his mind whispered. Your village isn't here. Grimmjow shot back, stepping forward, his frustration boiling over. Look around you. This is what's real. A bunch of leaderless, scared bastards who've spent their whole lives fighting for scraps. For the first time, because of you, they have something to believe in. And you're just going to sit here and let it all fall apart because you're homesick. His words were a punch to the gut, sharp and true. Naruto flinched. Harribel's a good leader, Naruto deflected. She's strong. She's a queen of survivors. Grimmjow roared, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness. She keeps us from starving. She keeps us from killing each other. She doesn't inspire us. She doesn't make us stronger. You do. You faced a god and made it kneel. You beat me without even trying. You turned our rabble into an army. Whether you like it or not, you're already our king. The throne is just a formality. He took a deep breath, his anger receding, replaced by a fierce, challenging fire in his eyes. But a king's power must be absolute. It can't be given. It must be proven. I can't follow a man who was handed a crown. And neither will they. He drew his sword, the sound of steel on scabbard ringing with finality. I, Grimmjow Jagerjackez, the Sexta Espada, challenge you, Naruto Uzumaki, for the right to rule Hueco Mundo. Fight me, for the throne. Win, and I will be the first to kneel and the last to defy you. Lose, and I'll take the burden from your shoulders. This wasn't an act of ambition. It was a demand for legitimacy. It was the only way Grimmjow, and by extension, the entire warrior culture of the Irankar, could truly accept an outsider as their leader. He had to win the crown not by appointment, but by conquest. Naruto looked at the fierce sincerity in Grimmjow's eyes and understood. This was not a challenge he could refuse. This was the final test. He stood up, a slow, weary smile touching his lips. You just don't know when to quit, do you? It's the best thing about me, Grimmjow grinned, his own bloodlust returning. Fine, Naruto said, his voice resonating with a newfound resolve. But not here. We'll do this on the roof of the fortress. In front of everyone. If you want a king, you'll all bear witness to his coronation. Word spread through Los Noches like wildfire. A formal challenge for the throne. The Sexta Espada versus El Dorado. It was the ultimate contest. The entire population of the fortress gathered in the vast, open spaces below the dome, looking up at the two figures standing on the highest point of the palace, silhouetted against the broken moon. Harribel watched from a high observation tower, her Fracken standing silently beside her. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She had offered him the crown to prevent bloodshed, to create unity. And now, to claim it, he was being forced into the very kind of battle she had sought to avoid. But she also understood its necessity. This was the way of their world. For Naruto to truly lead them, he had to dominate them. On the roof, a vast, flat expanse of white stone, Naruto and Grimmjow faced each other 100 meters apart. No holding back this time, you hear me? Grimmjow yelled, his spiritual pressure flaring to life. A jagged aura of blue energy roaring around him. I want the real you. The one that scared a god. You'll get it, Naruto promised. He closed his eyes, and a palpable wave of golden chakra washed over him. His jacket flapped wildly as the Nine Tails chakra mode ignited, cloaking him in a form of living, golden fire. Tailed beast arms of pure energy materialized behind him, lashing the air. The sheer density of his power was suffocating, a physical weight that pressed down on the entire fortress. Below, the weaker Arankar fell to their knees. Grimjow's grin widened. Yes, that's it. He held his sword aloft. Grind, Pantera. A cyclone of blue spiritual energy erupted around him, obscuring his form. When it dissipated, he was transformed. His body was now leaner, more feline, covered in segmented armor. He had a long tail, claws on his hands and feet, and his wild hair was now a flowing mane. His mask was gone, replaced by a ridged headpiece. This was his resurrection, his true form, his full power unleashed. The air around him crackled with destructive potential. The battle began with a sound like thunder. Both of them vanished. They met in the center of the rooftop, a ca. Cataclysmic explosion of gold and blue energy marking the point of impact. Their fists collided, and a shockwave erupted, cracking the stone beneath them and sending fissures racing across the dome. They were a blur of motion, a chaotic dance of gods. Grimjow was Savagery given form, his claws tearing through the air, each strike capable of leveling a mountain. He fired a volley of sharp, explosive energy darts from his elbows, forcing Naruto onto the defensive. Naruto, cloaked in Kurama's power, was a bastion of unstoppable force. He used his chakra arms as shields, blocking the flurry of CKS while his main body weaved through the gaps. He caught one of Grimjow's claws, the screech of energy on bone setting teeth on edge, and threw the espada across the rooftop. Grimjow flipped in midair, landing like a cat, and immediately fired a Gran Rey Cero, the ultimate Cero of the espada, enhanced with his own blood. A massive, swirling vortex of blue-black energy shot toward Naruto, distorting the very air it passed through. Naruto didn't dodge. He brought his hands together, forming a Bijudama, a sphere of pure, condensed positive and negative chakra, black as night and just as dense. He thrust it forward. The two ultimate attacks collided. The explosion was not a sound, it was an absence. For a single, terrifying moment, all noise, all light, all sensation was sucked into the point of impact. Then, reality reasserted itself. A hemispherical dome of energy, half gold, half blue, expanded outwards, washing over Las Noches. The fortress trembled to its foundations. The Ar below cried out as the wave of pure power passed through them. When the light faded, both combatants were still standing, breathing heavily. The rooftop around them was a cratered wasteland. Is that all you got? Grimjow taunted, his chest heaving, but a look of pure, ecstatic joy on his face. This was it, the fight of his life. Not even close, Naruto retorted, his golden aura flaring even brighter. He created a clone, and together they began to form his most powerful offensive weapon. The shriek of wind chakra being shaped into an impossible form filled the air. Futon. Rasenshuriken. But as he was about to launch the attack, something went wrong. A feeling of profound wrongness washed over him, far more potent than anything he'd felt before. It came from the direction of the Manos forest. From the same spot where the Arankar patrol had vanished days ago. His sage senses, amplified by his Biju mode, screamed a warning that went beyond physical danger. It was a metaphysical threat. The world seemed to flicker. For a fraction of a second, the color drained from everything. The black sky turned a sickening gray. The white stone of the rooftop became dull, lifeless. The vibrant energies of their battle felt muted, dampened. It was as if reality itself had blinked. Grimjow felt it too. What was that? Naruto's head snapped toward the source of the disturbance. The Rasenshuriken in his hand dissipated. Something's coming, he said, his voice grim. From the patch of desert that Mayuri's probes had identified as an existential void anomaly, the nothingness began to spread. It wasn't a physical wave. It was an expansion of unreality. The sand, the petrified trees, the very air in that region were not being destroyed, they were being unmade. Erased from existence. And from this creeping tide of nullity, figures began to emerge. They were not hollows. They were not Urankar. They were vaguely humanoid shapes made of the same visual static as the void itself, their forms constantly shifting. Their faces blank, featureless planes. They carried no weapons. They emitted no spiritual pressure. They were silent. They were the servitors of the Silent King. They began to march toward Las Noches. Their pace unhurried. They were drawn not by the promise of a meal, but by the sheer, offensive existence of the life and energy being thrown about in the duel on the rooftop. They were cosmic antibodies drawn to a wound in the fabric of the universe. On the ground level, an Urankar patrol stationed near the edge of the fortress saw them first. "What are those things?" one of them shouted. He charged, firing a arrow at the closest figure. The beam of red energy struck the servitor square in the chest and was absorbed without a trace. The figure didn't even slow down. The Urankar stared in horror. The servitor reached him. It didn't attack. It simply touched him. The Urankar didn't scream. He didn't explode. His form flickered, and he was gone. His spiritual pressure, his body, his very existence, erased. Not even a particle of Reishi remained. Panic erupted. The Urankar forces, battle-hardened predators, were faced with an enemy they could not fight, could not harm, and could not comprehend. The servitors walked through their ranks, and everywhere they touched, Urankar simply ceased to be. From the rooftop, Naruto and Grimmjow watched in horror. "What are they doing?" Grimmjow yelled, his battle lust forgotten, replaced by a cold dread. "They're not killing them. They're just disappearing." Naruto saw it for what it was. A power that didn't kill. A power that unmade. This was an enemy that operated on a conceptual level. Their duel was forgotten. The fight for the throne was meaningless in the face of a threat to their very existence. "We have to stop them," Naruto yelled. He leapt from the rooftop, a golden meteor streaking toward the chaos below. Grimmjow was right behind him. "Everyone, fall back," he roared, his voice carrying the authority of an espada. "Don't let them touch you." Naruto landed in the midst of the unfolding disaster. He created 100 clones, their golden forms blazing against the encroaching gray of the void. "Get everyone back inside the fortress. Now," he commanded. The clones surged forward, not to fight the servitors, but to form a living wall, pushing the terrified Urankar back, herding them toward the safety of the fortress gates. Naruto and Grimmjow stood back to back, facing the silent, advancing tide. "How do we fight something we can't hit?" Grimmjow asked, his claws crackling with blue energy. "We don't fight what they are," Naruto said, his mind racing. "We fight where they're from." He looked at the spreading patch of unreality, the wellspring of their foes. He couldn't just destroy the servitors. He had to cauterize the wound in the world they were crawling from. It would take everything he had. More. He rose into the air, the Nine Tails chakra mode blazing at its absolute peak. 9 truth-seeking orbs, spheres of perfect, elemental power, manifested behind him, a sign that he was tapping into the full six-path sage mode. The energy he was emitting was biblical, a force of creation standing against a tide of absolute nullity. "Grimmjow, buy me time," he yelled. Grimmjow didn't need to be told twice. With a feral roar, he launched himself at the silent army, not with Seros, but with his ultimate technique. Desgarin. 10 massive claws of brilliant blue energy extended from his fingertips, tearing through the air. He swung them wildly, not aiming to hit the servitors, but to create a barrier of pure destructive force, a chaotic storm of energy that momentarily slowed their advance, the sheer violence of the attack disrupting the space around them. It was a desperate, suicidal holding action, but it was buying Naruto the seconds he needed. High above, Naruto held his hands out, one forming a recentricon of impossible scale, the other a tailed beast bomb. Black and dense as a singularity. Then he did something he had never done before. He forced them together. He merged the ultimate expression of shape transformation with the ultimate expression of power. The result was an object of terrifying beauty. A miniature star, a Bijudama with 4 massive, shrieking blades of wind-natured chakra spinning around it. It hummed with a power that seemed to bend light and space. A weapon capable of rewriting the laws of physics. He aimed it not at the servitors, but at the heart of the void they came from. "Bijudama Recentricon," he roared, and threw it. The attack did not fly. It warped space, crossing the distance in an instant. When it hit the patch of unreality, it did not explode. It blossomed. A sun was born in Hueco Mundo. An unstoppable, incandescent wave of pure, positive, life-affirming energy erupted outwards. It was not destructive. It was creative. It was the conceptual opposite of the void. Where the void unmade, this attack rewrote. The servitors of the Silent King, caught in the wave, did not die. They were unwritten in reverse, their paradoxical nature collapsing as reality was forcefully asserted upon them. They dissolved into motes of pure, harmless light. The wave of golden energy washed over the patch of void, and where there was nothing, something was created. The sand was remade, the air was reformed. The very fabric of space-time was stitched back together, leaving a faint, golden scar on the world. The wound was cauterized. The light from the attack illuminated every corner of Hueco Mundo, a brilliant, false dawn that held back the eternal night. Every Arankar, from the weakest numero to Harribel herself, watched in absolute, reverent silence. As the light faded, Naruto descended, his 6 paths mode receding, leaving him panting from the monumental exertion. He landed softly on the newly formed sand. The battlefield was silent. The threat was gone. He had saved them. Again. Not as a stranger, not as a prisoner, but as a true protector. Grimmjow walked towards him, his resurrection fading. He was battered, exhausted, but his eyes held a new, unshakable light. He stopped before Naruto, and then, he did something that no one, least of all Naruto, had ever expected. He knelt. He placed one knee on the sand, bowed his head, and rested the fist of the king over his heart. "The throne is yours," Grimmjow said, his voice rough with emotion, but clear and strong for all to hear. It was not a statement of defeat. It was a pledge of fealty. A warrior's absolute submission to a power beyond his comprehension. From the fortress walls, another Arankar knelt. Then another. Then a dozen. Then 100. A wave of silent kneeling spread through the assembled populace, a domino effect of loyalty finally irrevocably given. Naruto looked at the sea of kneeling warriors, at Grimmjow, the proudest of them all, bowing before him. He looked up at the observation tower and saw Harribel, a single, proud tear tracing a path down her cheek. In the brilliant, golden afterglow of his own power, surrounded by his new people, he finally understood. His path had not ended when he left his world. A new one had just begun. He was no longer Naruto Uzumaki of the Hidden Leaf. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the first and undisputed king of Hueco Mundo. Far away, in a realm of perfect, ordered white, a figure sat on a floating throne. Koin Funimori, leader of the Celestial Mandate, watched the events unfold in a swirling orb of Kido. He had seen the duel. He had seen the arrival of the void. He had seen the birth of the sun that had pushed it back. His face, usually a mask of serene conviction, was grim. The anomaly was worse than he had feared. This, Naruto Uzumaki, did not just possess immense power. He could create it. He could impose his reality on the established order of the universe. He was not just a violation of the balance between life and death. He was a new axis upon which the universe might turn. The anomaly is confirmed, he stated to the 4 silent, powerful figures kneeling before him. It is no longer a localized threat. It is a cosmological one. He rose from his throne, his eyes cold with divine purpose. The Soul King's balance must be preserved. The 3 worlds must remain as they are. Prepare for purification. We will descend upon Hueco Mundo, and we will erase this living god from existence. Chapter 6. King of the Wastes. The coronation of Naruto Uzumaki was not a ceremony of pomp and circumstance. There were no velvet cushions, no golden scepters. His throne was the same stark, bone-white seat Harribel had occupied, and his crown was the unspoken allegiance of every Arankar in Las Noches. His ascension was sealed not by proclamation, but by the sight of Grimmjow Jagerjackes, the embodiment of their world's savage pride, kneeling in the sand. Naruto's first act as king was not to issue a decree or to demand tribute. He walked into the fortress's massive, under-stocked infirmary. The place smelled of antiseptic and despair, filled with Arankar suffering from centuries-old battle wounds that their regeneration could not fully heal, or from a slow, spiritual decay that was a side effect of their unnatural evolution. He walked among them, a silent, golden figure, and laid his hands upon them. He used the creation of all things technique. The same power the Sage of Six Paths had used to give form to the tailed beasts. It was not a simple healing jutsu. He reached into their very spiritual makeup, his chakra a divine scalpel, and corrected the flaws. He mended shattered souls, purged the spiritual cancers, and restored what had been lost. An Arankar who had lost an arm to a Shinigami's blade centuries ago felt a phantom limb tingle. Then watched in disbelief as a new arm, perfect and whole, grew from his shoulder in seconds. Another, whose energy pathways had been corrupted by a failed experiment of Xyloporos, felt the blockage dissolve. His spiritual pressure flowing freely for the first time in 100 years. He healed dozens of them, one by one, until his own vast reserves began to feel the strain. He didn't just restore their bodies. He restored their hope. He was not just a king who could protect them from their enemies, he was a king who could heal their pain. The reverence they held for him deepened, solidifying into a fierce, unbreakable loyalty. Harribel watched from the doorway, her heart aching with a feeling she finally dared to put a name to. It was love, a fierce, protective, and overwhelming love for this impossible man who had fallen into her dead world and taught it how to live again. She was no longer a queen, but she had never felt more purposeful. She was his first advisor, his most trusted confidant, the one who translated his revolutionary ideas into a language her people could understand. She was the architect of his new kingdom. Grimjow, for his part, embraced his new role with terrifying enthusiasm. He was no longer the Sexta Espada, he was the king's sword, the general of Hueco Mundo's new army. He drove the Arankar relentlessly in their training, his voice a constant abrasive roar in the training yards. But the training had changed. He was drilling them in Naruto's tactics, in teamwork, in mutual support. He was forging them into a cohesive fighting force, his feral rage now tempered with a new strategic discipline. The Arankar, eager to prove themselves worthy of their new king, met his brutal standards with a fervor they had never known. But Naruto knew that an army, no matter how strong, could not survive on hope alone. Hueco Mundo was a barren wasteland. Its only resource was the spiritual energy of other souls. It was a cycle of consumption that he was determined to break. He stood on the precipice of the Grand Canyon in which Las Noches was built, 100 miles of dead, white sand stretching before him. Harribel stood at his side. Grim, MJOW and the other powerful Arankar stood behind them, watching. "This world is starving," Naruto said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's been feeding on itself for too long. It needs a heart." He UGHT his hands together in a seal that no one there recognized. It was not a combat jutsu. It was a jutsu of creation. He drew upon the vast ocean of chakra within him, mixing it with the sage energy he had painstakingly gathered. He reached deep into his own genetic memory, to the power inherited from his ancestor, Hashirama Senju. The power of the first Hokage. Wood release. Deep forest emergence. He slammed his hands onto the stone ground. The effect was not instantaneous. It began with a deep, resonant hum, a vibration that came from the very bones of the world. Then, the ground began to tremble. 100 yards from the fortress walls, the white sand began to darken, turning a rich, loamy brown. A single, green shoot pushed its way through the sand. Then another, and another, then 1,000, 1,000,000. With a sound like the world taking its first breath, a forest erupted from the desert. It was not the petrified, skeletal woods of the Manos forest. This was a forest of vibrant, impossible life. Colossal trees, their trunks as thick as towers, soared into the air, their leaves 1,000 shades of brilliant green. Strange, glowing flora pulsed with soft light, illuminating the forest floor. A network of roots, thick as pythons, spread out, stabilizing the shifting sands and drawing spiritual nutrients from deep within the planet's core. The forest grew with terrifying speed, a tidal wave of life that spread for miles in every direction, forming a massive, circular oasis around Las Noches. From the center, a spring of pure, clean water, a byproduct of the life-giving sea. Hakra, welled up and formed a crystal-clear lake. The air itself changed. The thin, heavy atmosphere became rich, clean, and filled with the scent of damp earth and living blossoms. The oppressive spiritual emptiness was replaced by a vibrant, humming aura of natural energy. The Urankar stared, their senses overwhelmed. They had lived their entire existence in a world of white and black. To see this explosion of color, to feel this eruption of life, was a shock to their very souls. Some of them fell to their knees, weeping without understanding why. They were watching the birth of a world. Naruto stood, breathing heavily, sweat beading on his brow. The jutsu had taken a significant toll, even on him. But he looked at the impossible forest, at the new Eden he had created, and he smiled. A heart, he said, his voice full of satisfaction. Harribel looked from the forest to him, her eyes shining. He hadn't just given them a new source of food and water. He had given them a home. A real one. He hadn't just become their king. He had become their creator. It was into this moment of profound, world-altering peace that they arrived. There was no grand explosion, no tearing of reality. One moment, the air was still. The next, 5 figures stood on the edge of the newly born forest, their presence a cold, sharp dissonance against the vibrant life around them. They wore the traditional black shihakusho of the Shinigami. But theirs were of a finer, more archaic cut. They radiated a power that was ancient, refined, and utterly absolute. It was not the wild, chaotic power of an Espada, nor the vibrant, living energy of Naruto. It was the power of cosmic law, cold, impartial, and utterly unforgiving. The figure in the lead was a man who looked deceptively young, with calm, intelligent eyes and a serene expression that did not reach them. His long, black hair was tied in a simple knot, and he carried no visible zanpakuto. This was Koin Funimori. Behind him stood his 4 disciples, the elite of his celestial mandate. A towering giant of a man whose body was covered in intricate ceiling tattoos. A woman who seemed to be made of shadows, her form constantly shifting. A silent Mon, K whose spiritual pressure was so perfectly controlled it was almost non-existent. And a young, arrogant-looking swordsman who held a blade that shimmered with ethereal light. Naruto and the others turned. Their moment of triumph instantly shattered. The power radiating from these newcomers was immense, on a level that dwarfed even the strongest Espada. Shinigami, Grimmjow snarled, his hand instinctively going to his sword. The other Urankar tensed, battle readiness snapping them out of their awe. They are not Gote 13, Harribel said, her voice low and tense. She recognized the level of their power. It was akin to the Royal Guard, the Zero Division. Naruto stepped forward, positioning himself between the newcomers and his people. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone dangerously casual. Koin Funimori's gaze swept over the impossible forest, then to the man who had created it. He saw the golden chakra still faintly glowing around him. He saw the undeniable power. And he saw the abomination. A living being, immortal, radiating the energy of a god, ruling over the dead, and imposing the principles of life on a realm of nullity. It was a fundamental violation of the universe's sacred order. "I am Koin Funimori, an executor of the celestial mandate," he said, his voice calm and melodic, yet carrying an unshakable authority. "I speak with the authority of the Soul King's will, as interpreted by Central 46 and the Zero Division." He was declaring his authority to be absolute, second only to the Soul King himself. "You are the anomaly known as Naruto Uzumaki," Funimori continued, his tone not accusatory, but stating a simple fact. "Your existence and your actions in this realm have created a severe imbalance in the tripartite reality. You have violated the natural order. The natural order here was a nightmare." Naruto shot back, his easygoing demeanor gone. "I made it better. You have imposed the principles of the living world upon the realm of the dead," Funimori countered, his voice still unnervingly calm. "You have introduced a source of infinite, self-sustaining life energy into a system based on finite spiritual decay. You are a cancer, a beautiful, vibrant cancer, but a cancer nonetheless. If left unchecked, your improvements will cause the eventual collapse of the dimensional barriers between this world, the Soul Society, and the world of the living." He was not wrong. From a certain cosmic point of view, Naruto's power was a fundamental disruption. "I am here to offer you the Soul Society's ultimatum," Funimori said, his gaze unwavering. "You will abdicate the throne of this realm. You will surrender yourself to my custody, to be sealed in the Muken for eternity. And you will allow us to perform a purification ritual on Hueco Mundo, to reset it to its natural Bear in state and restore the balance. The Urankar behind Naruto bristled with fury. Grimmjow let out a low, murderous growl. They had just been given their first taste of hope, of life. And these Shinigami were threatening to rip it away and cast them back into the darkness. Naruto looked at the vibrant green forest behind him. He looked at the faces of his people, at Harribel's fierce, defiant expression. He had seen this before. Powerful men in high towers making decisions for the little people, deciding who lives, who dies, who suffers, all for some abstract, greater good. He had fought against it his entire life. He let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cold, humorless sound. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You want me to abandon my people, let you burn their new home to the ground, and then lock me in a box for the rest of time. All because I made a world that doesn't suck. Your perspective is limited," Funimori said, a hint of pity in his voice. "You see individuals. I see the structure of reality. Your compassion is a luxury the universe cannot afford." Naruto took a step forward, his own power beginning to swell. A golden sun rising to meet the cold, distant stars of the Shinigami's might. "Your balance is just another word for neglect," Naruto declared, his voice ringing with the absolute authority of a king defending his home. "You left these people to rot in a desert, to devour each other for survival. You call that order, I call it cruelty." He pointed a finger at Funimori, his gaze like chips of blue ice. "So here's my counter-offer. You and your friends can turn around, go back to your soul society, and forget you ever saw this place. This is my kingdom now. These are my people, their world is my home." He let his power flare, a shockwave of pure, golden life energy that made the trees of his new forest rustle and the Shinigami's robes flap. "Touch them," he said, his voice a low, terrifying promise. "And you will learn what a real anomaly is." The lines had been drawn. The ultimatum had been rejected. Funimori's serene expression did not change, but a deep, profound sadness entered his eyes. He had hoped to avoid this. He had hoped the anomaly would see reason. But it was as he feared. The living could never comprehend the necessities of the dead. "So be it," he whispered. A lament for the war he was about to unleash. "Your compassion has doomed you all." He raised a single hand, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The war for the soul of Hueco Mundo was about to begin. In a quiet, private chamber high in Las Noches, later that evening, the tension was thick. The Shinigami had not attacked. They had simply remained at the edge of the forest, their presence a silent, ominous promise. A storm waiting to break. Naruto, Harribel, Grimmjow, and the other powerful Urankar were gathered around a large table, planning their defense. "They're not attacking head-on," Grimmjow growled, slamming a fist on the table. "What are they waiting for? They are ideologues, not brutes," Harribel analyzed, her mind sharp and focused. "Their leader, Funimori, he believes he is in the right. He is not fighting for conquest. He is fighting for a principle. That makes him far more dangerous. He will not be reckless." "He's right about one thing," Naruto said quietly. Everyone turned to him. "My power. It is a disruption. I can feel it. The way it interacts with this world isn't natural. Continuing to use it on this scale could have consequences." "So you're saying they're right? That you should just surrender?" Grimmjow demanded, outraged. "No," Naruto said firmly, meeting his general's furious gaze. "I'm saying we have to be smart about this. We can't just have a slugfest. This isn't a fight for the throne. This is a war of survival. And their leader, he's on a whole other level." He could still feel the cold, immense pressure of Funimori's power. It wasn't flashy, but it was deep. As deep as his own. The weight of kingship was settling on him, heavier than he had ever imagined. He had won his crown. He had built his people a paradise. And now, he had to defend it from the gods themselves. Harribel watched him, saw the flicker of doubt and immense pressure in his eyes. He was so incredibly strong, but he was carrying the weight of an entire world on his shoulders. He was trying to do it alone. Later, after the war council had dispersed, she found him on the balcony, staring out at the dark forest where the enemy waited. "You were afraid today," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. Naruto didn't turn. He just nodded. "Yeah, I was. Not of them," she guessed. Of what they said, that your power could break everything. It's a lot, he admitted. His voice barely a whisper. The power I have, I never asked for it. It was a gift, a tool to protect my friends. But here, it feels like it could be a curse. What if he's right? What if, by saving this world, I end up destroying 3 others? It was the first time she had ever heard him voice uncertainty. It made him seem, for the first time, mortal. Human. She stepped up beside him. Her presence a quiet comfort. She didn't offer empty reassurances. She didn't tell him he was wrong. Instead, she slowly, hesitantly, reached out and took his hand. His hand was warm, calloused, and radiated a faint, life-giving energy. His fingers instinctively curled around hers. When I offered you the throne, she said, her voice soft but steady, I did not offer you a burden to carry alone. I offered you a kingdom to lead. And a kingdom stands with its king. He turned to look at her. Her green eyes, no longer guarded by duty or pragmatism, were filled with a fierce, unwavering belief in him. You were never alone in that decision, she said. And you are not alone now. He looked at their joined hands, then back at her face, illuminated by the pale moonlight. He saw his general. He saw his advisor. He saw his friend. And in the depths of her beautiful, steadfast eyes, he saw his queen. The fear, the doubt, the immense pressure of his crown, it didn't vanish. But for the first time, he felt like he wasn't carrying it by himself. He squeezed her hand, a silent thank you. The storm was coming, but for the first time, the king of the wastes felt like he was standing on solid ground. Blank, blank. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.